Isabella Carcel, the youngest daughter of the influential Duke of Carcel, whom not even the royal family dares to touch.
If she wants something, she won't rest until she gets it. And if she can't get it, she destroys it so no one else can.
She has a bad temper, and the treasure she desires most is the Crown Prince Christopher von Idris. And somehow he won her heart with his beautiful appearance and strength capable of raising someone to the pinnacle of the empire.
Maybe it's because he owns the precious stone, the heart of the earth, which is in the palace dungeon. All these reasons are wrong. Although she wanted the heart of the earth, Isabella wanted something much more special. Specifically Christopher, who turned into a wolf every full moon due to a curse. In other words, she didn't desire the man but his wolf form enchanted by the rare silver fur and the brilliant golden eyes. She decided to take the place of the crown prince's wife, a position she previously had no interest in, to get Christopher so she could have him all to herself. However, Christopher already had a lover. Wolves are attached to one partner for life. He couldn't leave his love and choose Isabella instead, so she finally decided to change tactics. If she can't be with him, she'll make him come to her himself. She just needs to remove the prince as heir to the throne. The most important thing is to find his flaws and weaknesses. Isabella had no problem destroying what she was obsessed with. She used an insane method that would never have occurred to a normal person and drove Christopher into a corner. It's such a terrifying obsession that it is chilling the terrible desire to possess even at the cost of her own sanity. These were the characteristic traits of a villain. And that is how Isabella met her death at the hands of Christopher, the one she so desperately wanted to have. Like any villain, she disappeared from the story after justice was served. The servant turned to her and asked if she was okay. To which Isabella replied, "Of course." After all, she had become that very same Isabella Carcel. She not only suddenly took a stranger's place, but she also took the place of the novel's villain, the one who gets her throat cut in the end. Somehow the real Isabella died, and she ended up in her body, although she doesn't know why this happened. One thing she knows for sure is that she really died, and she still remembers it clearly, the car that hit her while she was crossing the street and the pain that tore through her whole body. That's why she was so surprised when she woke up without a single scratch on her body. But what surprises her most is seeing this face. It's been a week since she became Isabella, but she still can't get used to it. Looking at her, she really is a beauty, though her eyes are a bit somber. It's most likely because of the atmosphere. It's quite scary, it's just the villain effect. The maid asked if she could fix her hair a bit, but she liked everything and asked her to continue. So the maid began to braid her hair. Isabella is slowly getting used to this life. After all, she won't be able to leave this body yet. She takes this opportunity without regrets, because apart from that sudden incident, Isabella's life is ideal. She was born into an incredibly rich family. In other words, she can now become immensely rich without doing anything. It's something she could never dream of in real life. And she's not sure if she felt bad about having to play the villain, or if it was some kind of perk, but her story hasn't started yet. The plot of the story will begin in a month. The main character Hannah will temporarily lift Christopher's curse in his wolf form. Because of this, Christopher will grow fond of the girl, and then they will start a romance. Eventually, Isabella will interfere in their relationship. Afterwards, she becomes madly obsessed. But she doesn't plan to interfere with the story's plot, and will live there forever. At least that was her goal. Isabella had a frightened expression on her face. Her brother Oliver brought a wolf because she loves them so much. And not just black but silver. The only silver wolf in the empire that she knows, the cursed prince. Christopher with brilliant yellow eyes. She couldn't believe why he was there. Maybe she would die sooner than in the original story. Isabella sat on the sofa lost in thought. She looked at the key and only one thought was going through her head. How did this happen? Isabella clutched the key in her hand, remembering her brother's words, "The fiercer the wolves, the more fun it will be to tame them." Let her try to tame him. And who needs to be tamed anyway? It doesn't make sense anymore. She felt she could fix everything. It wasn't Oliver who initially caught Christopher, but Isabella, the owner of this body. Isabella, an enthusiastic hunter, discovered a rare silver wolf and captured it. But she had no idea it was Christopher. Although given Isabella's character, she would have caught him even if she knew. For sure. Basically, she met Christopher before the protagonist Hannah. However, until the story began, she didn't know that this wolf Christopher had a curse on him that would begin to take effect when the full moon came out. Having fallen for the Empress's trick, he drank a poison that strengthened the curse. And he could no longer turn back into a human. That's why Isabella never knew Christopher outside of his wolf form. But the most important question is, how did she know he was that wolf? Most likely it was because of his brilliant, yellow eyes. The observant Isabella, upon seeing his amazing eyes, immediately realized that he was the one she was looking for. Isabella was happy to have found the lost wolf, but it didn't last long. Seeing Hannah by his side, she felt angry and jealous that she couldn't have him and finally went crazy. Knowing better than anyone that their meeting would be the beginning of misfortune, she didn't even go near the hunting grounds. When the lady invited her to hunt, she refused under the pretext of illness, because it would have been better to never meet until Oliver captured him. The original's fate is inevitable no matter how hard you try. He just dropped a bombshell on her. Isabella sighed deeply. She didn't understand why he was doing this to her. The wolf growled very loudly, so she ordered it to be quiet. At first she was so scared that her legs were shaking, but people adapt quickly. He was caught by someone else, so it's not clear why he is barking at her. Now she's more offended than scared. Isabella sat in front of him and watched. Apparently he didn't like her, but she didn't like him much either. And she doesn't understand why he's talking to her either. After getting involved with Hannah, he retained his sanity even while transformed into a wolf, and she doesn't know what he was like before. Then she asked him to let her go, but he just continued to growl. If he promises not to eat her, she will let him go. And I also asked him to nod his head if he understood. Well, the wolf just maintained its aggressive posture. She asked him to calm down, because she wasn't going to do anything. She approached the cage. Isabella can't tell if this creature has intelligence or not, but one thing she knows for sure. For the sake of her neck, she should never let him go. At least she could let him go after he turns back into a human. The problem is that only the main character is capable of breaking Christopher's curse, and she will only appear in a month. They have to live together for a whole month. He turned his head indignantly as if he understood what she was saying. If she were the main character, she would have immediately dispelled the curse. If she had the ability to cleanse this terrible situation, wouldn't have happened. The protagonist Hannah Manhwa was an exceptional sorceress and showed an extraordinary talent for purification. And this purification, of course, also worked on the poison that affected Christopher. When a month had passed since the wolf was captured by Isabella, Christopher found a chance to escape from her. He freed himself from Bella's clutches. Wandering aimlessly through the north in wolf form, he met Hannah. She immediately realized that he was cursed. She cleansed him of the poison and returned him to his human form, but the timing was unfortunate. Maybe he spent too much time in an animal's body. Christopher, who only followed his instincts, smelled Hannah delighting in her seductive pheromones, and then an R-rated scene happened. Isabella doesn't have the ability to purify, so without the experience of human life, their scenes would be completely different. A scene from a horror movie full of screams, blood, and gore. Since she is not Isabella, she has no reason to be overly obsessed with Christopher. It would be good if she could let them meet when the time comes. He will find the main character as in the original. From that moment on, he will be under her temporary protection. Isabella will protect him for a month, and then send it to the owner. You have to imagine you're raising a puppy because it'll be more convenient. There she realized he had serious wounds left by the assassin sent by the Empress, and wounds from Oliver, even wounds from the electricity in the cage. Seeing this, it's hard to blame him for being aggressive. She decided to heal him first, and maybe that would bring them closer. Isabel asked him to wait patiently. He seemed to have calmed down a bit, but that wasn't the case. He started to growl and bark again. She took back her praise and said, "What a dog." She returned holding a bowl of food in her hands. She carefully moved it towards him and told him to eat. Isabella started to watch him. It would be nice if he were always this calm. When she got a little closer, he growled at first. He was so wary he wouldn't even look at the meat, but now he's not afraid of it. He had changed a little. Isabella spent most of her time with Christopher. Anyway, there was nothing to do, and to kill time, she got closer to him. 3 days passed, but he simply got used to her as a person who gives him food. Whether here or there, everywhere, the one who feeds is the best. She did this in the hope that, in response to her attention, he would trust. And his perception would definitely change from her being an annoying and noisy piece of meat. She became a good piece of meat that feeds him meat, but she is still meat. She needs to become not meat to him. But a person, dark days are coming. She will have to do her best. But still, something has changed. The frequency of his barking decreased. The deafening barks that hurt her ears calmed down, not because she was feeding him. Anyone who saw him would think he was starving to death. He must have realized that his barking only caused him unnecessary stress. He had been behaving quite decently when they were treating him recently, even though several tranquilizer injections hadn't taken him down. In any case, now is the quietest time of the day. His recovery speed is remarkable. He's almost healed. Isabella also decided to go eat. When she entered the dining room, she saw Oliver arrive today. This is Isabella's second brother, the one who recently forced the wolf on his sister, the culprit of it all. She asked him why he had come since he was never seen in his own home, and it was the first time he was there. Since he had forcibly given her Christopher, Oliver, who never stays cooped up at home, is a wanderer at heart. In the life of Oliver, second son of the Duke of Carcel, no one intervened because he was not the successor. He had a strong free spirit, but unlike Isabel, he wandered about going wherever his eyes led him. That's why it didn't go well for him in the original story either. Oliver asked her if she had named the wolf. If you think about it, she really just calls him Hey or Wolf, and hadn't even thought about giving him a name. But her brother thinks it's mandatory. Since the wolf is hers, now she'll be the one calling him. No one would have thought that His Highness, Lady Isabella, would feel awkward about a name for the wolf, but he was the one who brought him here. Oliver asked if he should take him. It seems he can take the wolf. He has an even worse character than Isabella. If he takes Christopher, he will hunt him down and torment him. Just like Isabella in the original story, he would never let Christopher find a mate. Caused a lot of trouble, which is why he was kicked out of the family after all. It's unknown if he's capable of taking a life without hesitation. The family will be safe, but Oliver will definitely have a sad ending. Isabella said she would raise him, so don't even think about touching him. You'll die if you touch him. She grabbed his face and stuffed a piece of meat in his mouth. Why are you drinking a glass of wine with such a serious face? There is nothing beautiful about that bright face. His flaw is his excessive kindness. Finally, during lunch, she decided to choose a name, but she couldn't concentrate. When the wolf saw her, you could tell by his expression he was tired of her attention. She pulled up a chair and sat in front of him. As if the air around them had frozen, Isabella will give him several selected names, and he must respond if he likes any of them. She can't call him Your Highness, nor can she call him Christopher. She liked the name Belich, but from his expression, it was clear he was totally against it. Suddenly it occurred to her that his name, Christopher, could be shortened to Chris. He seemed to like this name too. Now she will call him Chris. She had a request for him, so Isabella asked him to listen to her carefully. She only gave him a name, but it seems they've already gotten closer. And Christopher's hatred seems to have lessened. Isabella released him from the cage. Christopher began to look around. The servants and Isabella stood to one side and watched. You could tell from her expression that she was very worried about whether everything would be okay. The maid looked at her with incomprehension. No matter how much she thought about it, it was too much. Isabella asked Grace to clear out the room next door. It would be the wolf's room. The maid asked her again. After all, this is very dangerous as he could break out, and it needs to be reinforced to prevent that from happening, and do it to the highest standard. In the end, they had to combine 2 rooms to achieve it. The maid asked what to do about him. She suggested fastening the muzzle. Isabella forgot to put it on because she was tired of taking it off, and putting it on every time she fed him. But she thinks it will be fine. It doesn't come off anymore. It's a shame we had to put him to sleep to fasten it. Everything went well. She'll use it later on a walk. The servants' jaws dropped, and in complete shock at what they heard. But she can't keep him locked up all the time. If he hadn't attacked, we could have left right now. Isabella asked for another collar and a locket with the name Chris, and that her name and address should be engraved on the back so he could be returned. The maid asked if anything else was needed. There were people who wanted him. She assumed to kill him. Grace doesn't understand that not even an elite assassin could finish the job. The rival, the Empress. The assassin would be beheaded before even getting close. Rumors of a silver wolf in her castle, that's a problem. They are far from the capital, so the rumors don't spread instantly. It would be a completely different story if the Empress had been carefully searching for Christopher. If she finds out Christopher is here, she'll send an assassin to get rid of him or demand he be handed over. Christopher won't lose to the assassin, so there's nothing to worry about. But we can't allow any contact with her. He hates this kind of thing, and she hopes everything works out, even though she was forced to take responsibility for the main character. She's not going to hand him over to the Empress. She needs to take care of him before he meets the female lead. In any case, Isabella has regrets. Even if he is a nasty dog, she doesn't want him to suffer in the Empress's clutches when she decided to bring him a bowl of water. He pounced on her aggressively. Then she forgot herself and asked, well, why is he barking again? After all, she hadn't given him such an order, but had removed some of the magic from the cage so it wouldn't hurt him. And he became very self-assured. In the first place, Isabella is his owner and protector, so he must listen to her commands. But it was all in vain. Christopher continued to growl and bark, and everyone had to cover their ears. The maid ran to her to check if everything was okay. Then Isabella shouted that she was his master and that he must be quiet and obey her. In fact, her nerves were at their breaking point. She couldn't take it anymore. But Christopher seemed to like it. Oliver burst into the room shouting at Isabella to shut her dog up. She turned to him with a look of disgust. We're in training, so you need to leave. But what kind of training is this when all he does is bark? Oliver gave him to her himself, and now he's angry. Now Isabella is praising him, telling him to tear that bastard's eardrums out. Oliver covered his face with his hand. It seemed like his head was about to explode. Now there are 2 dogs in the house, and why did I pick him up and give him to her? The castle was in complete disarray. But for some reason she was at least happy that now Oliver is also desperate. It would be fantastic if this method worked in a desperate situation. He picked up some books for her, from adopting a puppy to training my naughty dog. What should I do? A great dog starts with a great owner and master of the canine world, and turning any fierce dog into a gentle lamb. Isabella believed the author of the bestseller, A Professor for Dummies, hoping it would help her control Christopher's deafening bark. It seems they are both cursed. Even if you read for 100 days, you won't be able to apply anything in practice. Maybe she has no talent for learning. When I gave the paw command, he might bite my hand, so initially I tried to say sit, but instead of giving that command, he just started barking. From the look on her face, you could see that she had lost all hope and was begging him to sit. Christopher kept growling, so she decided to give him the bone. She got angry, calmed down, pleaded she tried everything, and the next thing she knew, Christopher was loose, and another week passed. Belatedly, she tried to restore order, but her authority was already under pressure from Christopher. With this approach, they will never go for a walk. Now he doesn't even respond. He just ignores her. All hope that they can establish a connection is slowly fading away. She'll have to send him to the heroine, as is in a month. She stood there and thought of nothing, but then I opened my eyes, and the question arose in my head. Is it really necessary to do this in a month? She jumped out of bed and decided she could start looking now. The maid was about to enter the room, and the food for Chris was ready. Isabella said she was going for a walk today, and that she would feed the wolf herself. Before leaving, she looked at him one more time. He may be a piece of shit rotten on the inside, but he's still handsome, so he needs to be fed. She doesn't even know where to look for Hannah. She has no information about where she was. Before arriving in the north, there was even an idea to send someone to look for her. But it's very unlikely they'll be able to find her, because Hannah travels to places where her skills are needed. That's why she never stayed in one place. Besides, she's good at hiding and running away, so there's a high probability they won't find her. Isabella knew it would be difficult. Suddenly she heard screams, "Save me." There was fear on her face. She didn't know what was happening. The only option was that Christopher had broken free. So she ran towards the screams. The servants fell to the ground. Christopher's chain broke. Isabella couldn't believe what she was seeing. There was fear in her eyes, but above all, what I don't understand is how he managed to get out at that moment. She understood, although until now she had praised him for his beauty. When those bright yellow eyes looked at her, no matter how much Isabella had tried until now, they couldn't get closer. She was still just a piece of meat to him. The guards ran towards her. Grace's maid and brother Oliver were also moving in her direction. Isabella didn't know what to do. Her body was hard as a rock. She couldn't move. The brother and the maid shouted. Isabella. Christopher was flying directly towards her. She was completely lost. Then she clenched her fist and hit him with all her might. Christopher didn't expect such a strong blow, but apparently Isabella didn't expect this either. The brother and the maid were in shock. Christopher just stood there and didn't move. Isabella has an exceptional fighting talent. A talent that is only found once every century to some extent. Her coordination is also ideal in archery, not to mention weapon handling. She even knows how to handle a mace, and her innate combat sense was as good as that of Leonard's follower. Although Isabella had a rather unpleasant character, the family had high hopes for her, even the elders. Even though they weren't happy with Isabella's behavior, they clung to her at every turn. They still admired her genius, so they tried to appease her, for Isabella finding something interesting was more important than being a genius or the strongest. Although Isabella was only causing trouble, the highly respected man had to bite his tongue and keep his hands off her. The Duke and his wife thought it was just their daughter's childish mischief, and to put an end to it, they sent her to Jado, at the king's request. Left alone, Isabella wandered the north like an untamed colt. Christopher got up and dusted himself off. She had a feeling he was just testing her. Isabella didn't know she was so strong. It all happened very quickly. Isabella approached him and touched his neck with her hand. She shouted, "Stay still," and also ordered the maid to bring the muzzle. Somehow they managed to close the matter at some point. Christopher pushed Isabella with his head, and she fell to the ground. The wolf lifted his paw and tried to step on her. Then she kicked him with such force that he flew back several meters again. He kept his eyes fixed on her as he flew. Isabella won this fight. It even seemed to her that perhaps he wouldn't be able to walk again. She picked him up. She threw him over her shoulder and carried him to the castle. She is ashamed that she still trembled so much in front of him. Although she is carrying Christopher in her arms, she isn't struggling at all apparently. She's that strong. Oliver clasped his hands in front of him and said, "This is my wonderful little sister." He had to stay to see one dog defeat the other. Apparently that's all he can say to his little sister who just fought a huge beast. Oliver said she is a beast herself. If she hadn't been carrying Christopher in her arms, she would have caught up with him and kicked him in the ass, because brothers don't talk to their sisters like that. But she wasn't going to waste time settling things, especially with this idiot in the hallway. Isabella met a maid and asked her to bring a doctor to Chris's room when they entered. Chris was quite nervous. She put him back in the cage. In the end, it turned out the lock wasn't broken, and now the question arises of how he managed to get out. But Christopher just looked at the floor with a guilty face. Isabella smiled and said, "Well, she hopes he no longer thinks of her as food. Now he must understand that she is his mistress." After finishing the interrogations, the culprit for Christopher's escape turned out to be the maid who brought him his food. Among the toys they gave Christopher, there was something very valuable. The maid opened the door wanting to take this thing, and Christopher ran out after learning the whole story. Oliver insisted that the maid's hand be cut off. She did it without knowing the main thing: the maid was in danger of serious injury. So in the end, she quit quietly due to Oliver's character. There is a possibility that the punishment would happen behind the scenes without her knowledge. She didn't have that much time to waste on the fired maid, so this matter simply passed her by. She saved her life and let her decide for herself how to survive. Isabella approached and asked Christopher for his paw. A whole week of training had already passed. Christopher just barked, and Isabella watched and was moved. Then he came up to her and put his paw on her hand, and she in turn praised him. Then she put a plate of meat on the floor because he deserved it. Christopher began his meal with great pleasure. The training is progressing well. Isabella noticed that Christopher had gained weight, and now they could finally go for a walk. She definitely needs to change things, especially cut the fat. Otherwise he will soon become a pig. After these words, Christopher started to bark. It's as if he understood the words about cutting the fat. She apologized to him and told him he could eat whatever he wanted. Isabella just wants him to lose fat and look handsome. For the main character, she asked him to stop because she didn't want to hurt him. Isabella approached to get the muzzle. If he wanted to go out, he had to endure it. But Christopher just shook his head, showing with his whole appearance that he didn't want to wear it. With this muzzle, he will become a gentle puppy. As soon as they put it on him, they will immediately go for a walk. Christopher lifted his leg to relieve himself. Isabella knew he was a wolf, and sooner or later it was bound to happen. She also noticed that he kept looking back at that moment when he turned around awkwardly. She remembered a moment from the book, looking at the owner, as if apologizing means protecting the helpless owner. She turned to him and told him not to worry, because she was capable of protecting him. Christopher didn't look back again. It seems that when she looks at him, he feels embarrassed. Isabella shouldn't look too much at that moment. Christopher pulled on the leash. He ran at an incredible speed, as if he saw something. Then looking up, Christopher began to bark aggressively. He ran to that spot because he saw a crow in the tree. Isabella tried to calm him down, but Christopher had no intention of listening to her. She didn't understand what was wrong with him. So I took the initiative into my own hands and decided to scare away the crow. At that moment, she had a bad feeling. She shouted again for the crow to go away and not torment him. Christopher watched as the bird flew away, but his aggression didn't disappear if it weren't for Isabella, who was by his side. She would have rushed to catch it. She was trying to calm him down. Isabella started to tell the maid about the crow, and how Christopher went crazy when he saw it. The maid suggested that he most likely just wanted to hunt it. Because he's an animal, he was cooped up and was very stressed from not having the opportunity to hunt. Grace might have been right, but she herself felt somehow uncomfortable when she saw that bird. Another maid opened the door. She couldn't find words to describe what was happening. It turned out he had made a real mess in the room. Christopher just looked at Isabella with a guilty expression. She assumed he had been harassed by crows when he was a child. Otherwise, he wouldn't have looked so anxious. Isabella tried to calm him down and told him everything was fine. She opened the cage for him to come out and opened her arms, showing that she just wanted to hug, but Christopher flew out and passed her at lightning speed. She smiled, thinking that he was a dog after all, but Christopher just ran into her room. He jumped on the bed and waited for her to arrive. Isabella thought it was very sweet, but the maid took it negatively and said, "What a disgusting brute." She asked him to get up, but she really wanted him to promise that he would sleep peacefully, and that she would let him stay. The maid was still afraid because he had already run away, and had behaved quite aggressively. It was too risky. But she completely forgot that she had invented something stronger. Grace started to think of options. What if he attacks her in her sleep and suggested at least putting a muzzle on him? But Isabella refused, because it would be suffocating for him, and he wouldn't be able to sleep there. Chris knows his place, so everything was in order. Then the maid would be nearby. Oliver was surprised that Chris now spent all his time with her, but really only at night. Although it's daytime and he's lying right at her feet, he's simply a beauty, said Isabella. He asked where the Isabella had gone, who had been whipping animals to make them stronger. But she seemed reborn. She realized how messily she had lived before. Now her priorities had changed, and she would live decently. Oliver doesn't recognize her because he thinks it's abnormal. She is annoyed because her brother talks like that, and she ordered Chris to bite him. He crept closer and started to growl angrily in his direction, but Oliver was just joking. A knock was heard at the door and the words, "I am the master," and he was allowed to enter. Isabella immediately understood who it was. It was Baron Simon, the vassal who dominated the duchy. He was very surprised to see her, as they hadn't seen each other in a long time. Suddenly his gaze fell upon the wolf. Simon hadn't seen him before. Christopher was heading towards him angrily. Baron Simon, unlike the eternal wanderer Oliver and Isabella, who constantly gets into trouble, is the true wielder of power in the duchy, tired of his complaints. Isabella would ignore his greetings and sometimes get angry, but she was not the same Isabella anymore. Christopher continued to growl at him. She tried to calm him down because he was her ward, and there was nothing to worry about. Simon most likely came here on business. That look of his gave everything away immediately. This crazy duchess is raising a dog just like herself. This is what he thinks, and other servants are of the same opinion. He cleared his throat and said, "Well, my lady, this is the mine I was talking about." Simon placed a huge shiny stone on the table. Isabella couldn't even believe her eyes. The last report of diamonds was a week ago. "And this stone is the last one." For now, there was a sad atmosphere in the room. Oliver said it was a useless stone. So Isabella asked him what he was talking about. "This is a magic stone, which means it will bring a lot of money." Oliver's and Simon's eyes lit up immediately. Magic, a magic stone. Isabella was surprised that they didn't know about magic yet. In the original story, the duchy was famous for its magic stones. She thought they already knew. They assumed that a magic stone had to be blue, a processed blue stone, and this stone is a nugget. A wizard she knew told her about it. Simon recalled that last year they sponsored a magician who was showing his rare gem. That one was similar, but this one was bigger. If they don't believe her, they can check for themselves. They decided to do just that. Isabella turned to the Baron, who apparently thought she had no talent when he thinks about all the money he spent to compensate for the damage she caused. He is glad she has changed lately. The conversation took a different turn. Everyone was tense. She guessed why he was behaving like that. Christopher started to yawn, and Isabella noticed it. She immediately realized he wanted to go out. Simon stopped her because she should know something. It seems there's still something to complain about. There are rumors that His Highness the Crown Prince has disappeared. Then Oliver said that the prince is doing just fine wandering around here and there. If his older brother says that, then it's not just a rumor. We must assume the problem is serious. Another problem was that Oliver didn't like him very much if he doesn't return in a month. He's not sure if they should hold the young lady's coming-of-age ceremony here. Then Isabella remembered her birthday was approaching, but for some reason they both reacted cautiously. They thought she would be angry, but she herself said she had been reborn. Isabella and Christopher went outside. Originally, the coming-of-age ceremony was supposed to be a grand event in Jeddo. Because of the prince, it had to be paid for by the estate. If it had been the old Isabella, she would have destroyed everything by now. But to her today, this event is unimportant. The approaching coming-of-age ceremony only means the original events are also approaching. It won't be long until Christopher's transfer day soon. He will be able to go home as soon as Hannah arrives. Everything will fall into place. Isabella walked by and said, "I won't sell." Simon asked her to let him take a look, to which she replied that she was busy, and that he shouldn't bother her. The reason they argue is because of Oliver. That damn brother left everything to her and ran away. She tried to be clever for nothing, and her loose tongue got the better of her. He thanked her for the discovery, but he left the export business to her. The idiot, the weather was beautiful. There was a basket of balls on the ground. Isabella took one in her hand, then turned and threw it, saying, "Chris, catch!" All the sand flew into Simon's face. But he wants to quickly figure out how to avoid it. Christopher retrieved the ball and looked at it with disgust. His opinion matched Simon's. She asked him not to come anymore, to which he replied that couldn't happen. Then Isabella asked why. She knew about the stone's magic, something no one else knew, and she was the one who found all the suitable clients. No one is more suitable than her to take on that role of responsibility, but Isabella knows nothing about business and can't do anything. She only found one candidate for the processing plant for Oliver's sake. She didn't think it would lead to such an outcome. She dug her own grave. Simon looked at her and said that it was enough for her to just state her opinion. But if that was the case, then he should take care of everything at once. The only thing important to her was spending all her remaining time with Christopher. Isabella turned around and saw that Chris was nowhere in sight. She just realized how he jumped the fence and disappeared from sight. Even in that moment, she was speechless. One of the swords flew over the fence. He can escape after Hannah arrives in the north. It makes no sense to escape now. If he escapes, it will be a dog's life. Simon fell to the ground. Christopher fled in the blink of an eye, acting so silently that she let her guard down. Isabella began to shout at him, "Come back." Several thoughts ran through her head about what if Christopher knocked over the crew? What if he gets lost and loses consciousness, or an evil person catches him and tortures him suddenly? Christopher jumps back and returns with the ball. He runs to Isabella and spits the ball out at her feet. It was the ball she threw. He didn't run away, he went for the ball. She thought he hated her. It turns out she was wrong. Like an idiot, Isabella praised him because he was so nice. He didn't give up and brought her the ball. That was the first show of affection. She dreamed they would grow closer in a friendly way. Unlike the day he made a mistake this time, she definitely felt his trust in her beautiful kind, her mischievous puppy. Christopher jumped and knocked her over. They fell and lay on the grass, hugging. Simon approached her to make sure everything was okay. Isabella was surprised the Baron hadn't left yet. He said he needed to give her something, and then he handed her a folder. Isabella began to study it carefully, summarizing the contents of the document. Accessories made with magic stones were to be delivered to the jewelry store belonging to the Guild of the Duchy of Carcel in Edo. Simon also asked her to read the back. Mana stones are difficult to handle and must be entrusted to an experienced craftsman. However, this comes at a cost, even with a high salary. Not all masters will accept the job. It's too expensive. And her family needs to get the maximum possible profit. It will become her pension fund. Then she remembered Arcilla and said the name out loud. She asked Simon to contact Arcilla's workshop. The name is not well known. She's an experienced craftswoman. Countess Jarell had a necklace last year for His Majesty's birthday celebration. It was made by her. Simon was surprised he understood which necklace she was talking about. This necklace was famous enough for the Baron to immediately understand what it was about, the only beautiful and small necklace in the world. Despite being a magical instrument, it is so well known that rumors have reached the northernmost part of the duchy. But she remains anonymous. Isabella knows because it's a jewel. Jewels are beautiful. And the original Isabella is crazy about beautiful things. When Isabella heard rumors about the Countess's necklace, she immediately began to question her people in search of the master's name. And the cost will also be reasonable, but she doesn't like to be the center of attention, so it won't be easy to get a contract. She has already been rejected. If it weren't for Arcilla's extraordinary skills, she would have already died. Simon said he would organize everything like a military leader going to war. Isabella let it out with a forced smile. She would like him to never come back here. He turned around. He had never seen the Duchess smile before. With such a desperate and demanding voice, she called the wolf. It wasn't a voice of possessive desire, but a voice of genuine concern and worry. Everyone walks at this age. Isabella just stood there a little longer. She will grow to be worthy. He thought she was an immature girl who didn't know the world, and looked at her with a biased view. It would be good to train her in management next time. Thought Simon. Isabella just wanted to die already. The Baron was too persistent. He has been harassing her all day. This behavior is annoying. How much longer will I have to suffer? She thought. Christopher lay down beside her as if supporting her, and she thanked him. Even the dog that is the werewolf. Christopher sympathizes with her. He was able to express it somehow with his face. She needed to sleep quickly. She wished him good night. Christopher started to bark. It was too noisy for her. She wanted to ask him to be a little quieter when she opened her eyes. The wolf tried to protect her from some villains. She jumped up and shouted, "Assassins!" A man in a black cloak approached her, and she covered her face with her hand at that moment. Christopher ran towards him and threw him aside. He turned to her and barked. She apologized. Now was not the time to space out. She took her sword. Then she turned and struck the man. A huge pile of dead bodies lay on the bloody floor. 10 assassins burst into the room. She had just killed one and Christopher had 4. Leaving 5, Isabella asked who sent them. "Do you want to test the power of her puppy?" The 2 men looked at each other. One of them had a dagger in his hand. She asked again who wanted her puppy. Since they were silent, what could she do? She would have to kill them all. She was sleeping peacefully. When suddenly all this savagery occurred, she wiped the blood from her face. Then she realized that Christopher was looking out the window as if something was bothering him, or he was trying to show something. She moved closer and went out onto the balcony. A crow was perched on a branch and looked directly at her. This was the same defense she left the tree with. As she walked, it seemed the Empress was spying on them. Christopher got angry because he knew that the crow was the Empress's eye. She still doesn't know who she's dealing with. Isabella runs inside and throws her sword. She took a gun and shot directly at it. The first shot hit it and it fell to the ground. Isabella didn't think the crow was looking at her. She wondered how it knew Christopher was there. It was her mistake to have guessed, knowing that the Empress used her familiar to manipulate birds. The familiar, a magical theriomorphic spirit in the service of the witch. She wasn't prepared for this due to her complacency. She approached Christopher. He didn't look very well. Then she hugged him and told him everything would be okay. She saw a scratch on his side. He was injured. Blood was running down his fur. Isabella took him and began to clean it. Christopher got hurt protecting her. Who would have thought he would help her like this? She didn't even realize it until she heard barking while she slept. As if he was losing his mind, she sighed deeply and said, "It's his mistress's fault." Christopher came closer and buried his face in hers. Something pricked her. Bella didn't even notice. But it seems she got hurt too. This is the first time Christopher has licked her face. Maybe he's worried. She praised him and also asked him not to worry, because he had saved her. He rolled onto his back, something she had never seen before. It seems to be the Empress's fault, but she will protect him no matter what. Suddenly Christopher spoke and asked how she knew that the Empress was the culprit. For a second, Isabella was speechless. She didn't expect that in his wolf form he could talk. At one point he stood up on his hind legs and tried to jump on top of her, but she stopped him. Her dog talks, but he's not a dog, but a wolf. Isabella began to remember the past. In the original story, he was a wolf, a true beast. So there was no human intelligence in him. Even after imprinting on Hannah, he couldn't speak. It was as if this world had gone crazy, embodying the villain she raised Christopher, and she was like sitting on a time bomb. Christopher didn't even speak, and now reason has awakened in him. He showed his teeth, revealing his fangs, and got closer. "I'll ask again." His voice sounded low and threatening. With a powerful paw, he pressed down on her shoulder, pinning her, his hot breath burning her skin and a yellow fire burning in his eyes. Then with a sudden movement, he threw her to the ground without loosening his grip. "How did you know that was the Empress?" He growled right in her face, so close that every word echoed like a roar in her chest. Without thinking, Isabella raised her fist and punched him in the face with all her strength. The wolf flew back to the wall, his fur bristling, but she immediately gasped. She was just scared. Her hands were trembling. "I'm a terrible mistress," she whispered, covering her face with her hands and treating him like a dog. Yes, he was no longer a dog. But what tormented her most was a question: how could he speak? He doesn't know, it's his first time. But he will have to ask for the third time, so he asks her to answer normally. "How did you know it was the Empress?" She answered that it was because of the crow. Everyone knows that crows obey the Empress. She had spied on them before, and had thought it was suspicious, but she hadn't expected them to send assassins. And of course, she hadn't thought at all that Christopher would think it was suspicious. Isabella asked him if by any chance he was the Empress's wolf. Since all the assassins were aiming for him, he replied that she shouldn't mess him up, or he would throw up. He can make that face, and he really looks human. Even though he is human, she would have to pretend she didn't know who he was, until he revealed his identity even under threat of death. She wouldn't dare say that she raised a wolf. Knowing that he was the crown prince would seem too suspicious to anyone. I turned to her. "Isabella Carcel." She turned and looked at him questioningly. She was surprised that he knew her. The Duchess is well known as the mad dog of the Carcels. "Your presence means that I am in the Duchy of Carcel, lucky or not. How can I put it?" He paused and then continued more seriously. "Christopher has something to tell you, and she might not even believe it, but he is the crown prince of this empire, Christopher von Idris. And now I am under a curse at this moment." His voice sounded firm and confident. Isabella did a perfect job of feigning surprise. With her eyes wide as if she were hearing this for the first time inside, she was already dying of discomfort. Not knowing how to properly address the prince who just yesterday was her dog, her thoughts were confused and her tongue was almost tied. Apparently she will die of discomfort, constantly getting confused about the level of courtesy. The Duchess is now the only one he can trust, and she should take it much more calmly, but she can no longer believe what happened in the courtyard and what the wolf says, and he is so familiar with her, that is why she doubts it is him. The Duchess is sweet, but her character is tougher. He asked how she became a duchess, and Isabella was a little worried, because Christopher remembered absolutely nothing. He seemed to smile, if you can call it that, and asked what the problem was. There was a slight mockery in his voice, but his eyes remained serious. Isabella clasped her hands in front of her, pretending to think how lucky she was that he remembered nothing. It crossed her mind if only he knew how he really ended up there. When he found out what had been there before, she could barely hold back a nervous sigh. Now he realized that she was his lover, and it seemed he took it for granted. Even if she gets arrested for this, he won't say anything. Her second older brother brought him here wounded. He brought him intentionally, but even under threat of death, she wouldn't say it. The second one is Oliver. He became curious. She didn't raise him to be eaten. How can he say such a thing when she raised him with so much love? She gave him the best quality meat. He slept on the softest pillow every day they went for a walk. There were many problems while she was raising him. Although he doesn't know it, it all sounded good. But there were rumors about the Duchess's vices. Somehow she became different. Her beauty disappeared somewhere. Now she only sees a smiling wolf in front of her, forgetting herself. She clasped her hands to her chest and asked if he wanted to be thrown out. His answer was no. Then she asked him if he was okay when he wanted to answer. She covered his face with her hand and gestured for him to be silent because the servants were arriving. The whole group burst into the room. They are punctual. I was going to call them anyway, and as you can see, the room is too dirty despite it being midnight. But she asked them to clean. Isabella was perfectly fine, but Chris was hurt, so she asked for a doctor. The maid saw a scar on the face of a national treasure. It needs to be treated urgently. She was embarrassed by the words, "What kind of national treasure is this?" and also asked her not to say it again. "This level should be enough. You have to be at the level of a sacred relic to want to be treated," said the maid. It seems the guard heard something. Isabella was very embarrassed. Her face was known throughout Yedo, but she didn't understand what treasure he was. She agreed and said that the maid would take care of treating him. No matter how strong Isabella is after encountering the man and the assassin's raid, and even with a talking Christopher, she can't stop trembling. She had one more question. After the senator returned, Christopher began to ask her how many days he had been there, and how things were going in Yedo after his disappearance. She answered the first two questions truthfully, but she was already ready to die of fatigue. Isabella turned towards him, at which point Christopher jumped. He must understand that now His Highness is her dog and has a nice leash. He is now her property. It's difficult to claim ownership on the first encounter. She took care of him for almost a month, so she has every right to do so. "So this is the lady's order," she asked to continue tomorrow and dropped onto the bed. Isabella fell into a deep sleep. She was too tired after such a stormy night, but Christopher heard something completely different. He heard that her temper was tyrannical and incorrigible. Who to kill this time? It was so bad that the rumors reached his battlefield, so he knew how serious it was. But rumors are always exaggerated when it came to his younger brother Leonardo. His face hardened. But she was far from being a tyrant, that voice. And that warm attitude, he didn't even think of suppressing or dominating them. He figures they have been living together for a month now. Maybe that's why he is now her property. It was a kitten's bite. What an interesting woman, Christopher. The crown prince looked at her, sleeping again. He couldn't sleep on the worn-out dog pillow, so he lay down next to her. Isabella heard a noise and opened her eyes. Christopher was standing over her. It scared her a lot, but she didn't understand why he was behaving like that. It wasn't even 10 in the morning yet. Apparently he had a dream or something happened while he slept, and he turned back into a wolf. She's going to go crazy confused about where Christopher is and where Chris is. Suddenly his mouth opened, and quickly closed the distance between them so fast that she didn't even have time to dodge. Sharp fangs sank into her lip. Biting the tender skin, warm blood immediately appeared on the surface, and Isabella froze in shock. Christopher narrowed his eyes, and began to slowly lick the scarlet drops with his rough tongue. There was some kind of unsettling tenderness in his movements. Isabella looked at him horrified. Why did he suddenly do that with her eyes wide with horror? She got angry and asked him what he was doing. He simply said that it had worked, and was very pleased with himself. After which she forgot to hit him on the head. He asked if it was too cruel, as if the only thing that mattered to him was biting her lips, when she wasn't even awake yet, and she also expected him to apologize. Christopher bit because he was hungry. He was kidding, that wasn't the point at all. When he woke up he couldn't speak, so he woke her up. But her lips smelled very delicious. It seems he has forgotten his place. Isabella looked at him angrily. Maybe she should show him again who is who. It probably works when he tastes her blood yesterday, and today he found his voice when he licked her blood, now that I think about it. It actually happened after he licked the blood from her cheek. According to him, her blood has some special power. Maybe the gift of purification like Hannah's. But if this were true, then he would become a man. That's why he says Duchess Christopher wishes he could lick her blood. It's as if he's mocking me, even though on the outside he's a wolf. But inside he is a man. A human being. She doesn't care at all. Even if he looks like a wolf, she doesn't feel any emotion. It would be a problem if I were worried about the dog's proximity. However, next time he needs her blood, he should bite her finger. There's no need to drool on her lips. He lowered his head because he had already had the kindness to try not to hurt her. That kind of look on Christopher's face excites her. She asked him if he wanted more. He said that would be fine. Isabella feels like a cheated idiot. Isabella took the dagger and pierced her finger and then brought it to Christopher, and he began to lick the blood. He licked it as thoroughly as if he were eating something tasty. And it was very strange. Isabella asked him what he would do next. First, he needed to contact Leonard. In the current situation, only his blood relative Leonard can believe in Christopher's curse. When they finish, he will give her everything she wants. She is his faithful dog. She would do anything for her friend right now. Isabella wrote a letter with Christopher's words about how he accidentally ended up in the duchy, and why his brother needed to come urgently. At that moment, I even felt a little sorry. She turned around and put her hands on the table. She took Christopher's paw and said we needed his seal. They put a seal on it. It looked a little strange, but it seemed to work. Now they are colleagues and are in the same boat. So from now on, he should call her Isabella. They even shook hands. While he is bound by the curse, they need to become close friends. Isabella handed the letter to the butler and asked him to send it to his brother Leonard. It was very urgent. There was a look on her face that he noticed early. The young duke was very angry after the night attack on her. The sounds of his night's suffering could be heard throughout the castle, the reason for so much noise in the morning. He knows that she always refuses. But today they received a lot of really good medicine. He didn't have time to finish speaking. She interrupted him and said she would drink it unconditionally. Tell him to bring it. He will bring it every day. Because as they say, take care of your health from a young age. If Oliver cared about her wounds. It's strange that he didn't even visit her. Isabella found him on the castle roof. She tried to touch him, but he pushed her hand away. She heard that he was worried about her, but for some reason he didn't come. The situation is a complete disaster. He had a very disgusted face. Oliver made the knights run. It seemed they were about to lose consciousness. Isabella asked him why he was hounding them like that rats got in while they were sleeping. So he's scaring them off. And he's also worried that she came out after the attack. This time he will say for sure that dogs are better than people from today on. She will be accompanied. Isabella began to refuse. He was surprised that after such an attack she wouldn't agree. Oliver notó el corte en su labio y luego preguntó qué tipo de criatura lo había hecho el ladillo que estaban jugando con Christopher Oliver. Estaba indignado porque fue mordido por su propio cachorro. Él se había ido hace mucho tiempo y ahora todo está perdido todo. Y esta su alteza Isabella Carcel se ha vuelto tan blanda ahora anda mordida por su perro. En ese momento se tapó los oídos y dijo que lo entendía, a lo que él respondió o ya lo hubiera dicho inmediatamente. Después de su derrota ante Oliver tuvo que regresar al dormitorio con una escolta. A ella no le importa. Si el caballero está en la puerta de su habitación pero no podrá hablar con Christopher de esa manera, Isabella seguiró y le dijo eres libre. Pero él respondió de ninguna manera señorita. Luego le dijo que él podía descansar en la habitación de al lado cuando ella estuviera en su habitación que lo llamaría si necesitaba salir. Eso era una orden pero él entró en su habitación con ella. Ella realmente no quería usar ese método pero que podía hackear así que gritó. Vete ahora mismo. Él tenía miedo pero la comprendió. Al parecer debería haberlo hecho así inmediatamente. Christopher la miró un poco extraño. Él no lo puede creer en voz alta porque no esperaba que ella fuera atenta a un caballero que debe cumplir con sus deberes, pero ella es simplemente quien es. Ella preguntó si le habían cambiado el vendaje porque debía hackear el mismo. Cosas tan desagradables. Todos sus subordinados habían desaparecido en algún lugar. Todos eran tan feroces que nadie se atrevía a tocarlo. Tanto es así que no dejaba que su herida sanara, por lo que ella era responsable de su alimentación, sus paseos y hasta su aseo, y parecía que lo estaba haciendo bien, pero en realidad simplemente lo golpeó fuerte. Al principio estaba luchando con el personaje de este lobo, pero ahora mirando hacia atrás se convirtió en un querido recuerdo de Christopher. Ella lo valoraba mucho el lobo y realmente ella lo valoraba con locura, lo apreciaba como a su propia vida. Es más, pagó con su vida. No se pueden cometer errores. Justo cuando Isabella estaba a punto de curar la herida se dio cuenta de que se había curado. Ella preguntó sobre tal habilidad, sí, pero a él le gustaría una habilidad tan conveniente. Entonces recordó que le había dado su sangre. En estas circunstancias parece más probable que su sangre tenga poderes curativos. No se suponía que Isabella tuviera tal habilidad. La capacidad de curar aparecerá solo en el personaje principal, pero definitivamente no en el villano. Probablemente no funcionaría en humanos si fuera posible, pero su cuerpo no tendría ninguna cicatriz, por lo que el poder solo funciona en Christopher Legust. Oh no puede deshacerse del sentimiento de profunda conexión con él. Ella notó que él estaba interesado en ella. Porque le preguntó cómo estaba su labio. Si un rasguño así la hubiera lastimado no habría tenido el apellido Cartel. Isabella le acarició la cabeza. Él se apartó un poco. No le importaba si ella lo acariciaba o no, pero se preguntaba por qué lo estaba haciendo. Ella respondió porque es guapo. Últimamente ha habido problemas porque Christopher piensa que ella es una buena persona, a pesar de su estrecha relación, y tiene motivos para pensarlo. Simón corrió a la habitación y preguntó qué tipo de criaturas se atrevieron a atacar a la dama. Dijo que quería deshacerse de ellos, tal vez por la aparición del varón Simón, con quien las relaciones se habían suavizado recientemente. Isabella se volvió hacia él y le dijo que no podían pelear abiertamente. Entonces él respondió que también podía contratar asesinos. El varón Simón es un hombre poderoso en el ducado. No pudo mantenerse alejado y se tomó el ataque en serio. Christopher piensa cada vez más que su reputación de villana es solo un rumor. Allen, que al principio se mostraba cauteloso a la hora de molestarla, ahora la irrita cada vez más con su apariencia. Hoy salen a pasear solo ellos dos con Christopher. Isabella señaló hacia un lado y le dijo que esperara. Allen le agradeció por esto y felizmente se dirigió al lugar indicado. Isabella se preguntó cómo un tipo tan estúpido había entrado en los caballeros de la cárcel. Christopher se ofreció a domesticarla. Cree que Ellen la obedecerá, pero de eso te puedes olvidar, porque ella ya domesticó a uno. También era de tipo feroz, aunque en realidad ese tipo feroz no era Christopher. Leonard debía delegar hoy. Ella miró a Christopher y se dio cuenta de que no lo había banado en 3 semanas. Ella se volvió hacia él y le dijo que necesitaba arreglarse los rumores. No mencionó. Él pensaba que ella era una buena persona, pero resultó ser tan cruel. El pelaje de Christopher estaba todo enmaranado con barro. El agua estaba muy sucia. Era como si hubiera perdido su virginidad. Estaba diciendo tonterías porque aparentemente ella lo tocó accidentalmente mientras lo lavaba en el baño. De hecho, era como si nunca hubiera intentado aparearse perder su virginidad simplemente tocándola. Era tan puro que no parecía alguien que hubiera corrido por el campo de batalla. Christopher estaba indignado porque no se puede hablar de apareamiento en cualquier lugar. Es como si no tuviera huesos en la lengua. Isabella comenzó a bromear diciendo que ella se encargaría de él y le encontraría una hembra adecuada. Se tomo muy personalmente cada palabra que decía Isabella hablando de vergüenza y moralidad, ella eco agua sobre Christopher. Y dijo que debería avergonzarse de mirarla toda mojada. Terminaron sus procedimientos de agua. Christopher se sacudió y salpicó a Isabella. Con agua desde la cabeza hasta los pies, ella tomó un pañuelo y comenzó a limpiarse el cabello mojado. Esta era su venganza. Christopher se sentó en el suelo, levantó la cabeza y miró hacia el techo. Resultó que había demasiadas gotas cayendo. El resto se secara afuera. Caminó Isabella temblando de frío. De repente el hermano de Leonardo la llamó. Por alguna razón pensó que Leonard se parecía a Oliver. Leonard Carcel, el hermano mayor de Isabella. Oliver se rió mientras se acercaba a ella y le preguntó si estaba jugando en el agua. Se le veía la ropa interior. Pidió no insultarle a la vista y cambiarse rápido. Momento en el que Leonard le dio una buena palmada en la nuca. Oliver tenía razón por eso. Christopher miró fijamente al techo. Isabella lo miró y le preguntó si veía algo. Pero él comenzó a negarlo todo. Oliver incluso se estremeció de sorpresa. Parece que está durmiendo porque este perro está hablando. La voz parecía muy familiar, como si su Alteza el Príncipe Heredero estuviera parado frente a ellos. Entonces Christopher respondió que no había cambiado en absoluto. Todavía vive como un caballero con manos blancas. Oliver se enojó y rápidamente corrió a buscar la manta. Luego cubrió a Isabella con él y le dijo que no mirara como dijo Oliver antes. Todos los hombres son lobos, pero él se lo dio él mismo, pero pensó que era un lobo de verdad. Leonardo diciendo basta. Los apartó uno del otro y les dio una tarea a cada uno. Isabella debía ir a su habitación y cambiarse de ropa y Oliver debía dejar de gritar. Lavarse y bañar. Isabella miró a Leonard y le preguntó si podía secar la lana de su Alteza. Porque si se demoraba enfermaría. Christopher comenzó a sentir. Leonard dijo que lo secaría. Oliver se giró y le dijo a Isabella que se pusiera un vestido muy negro. Absolutamente negro. Cuando se me olvidó volver, él la encontró. Estaba tan pálido que ella pensó que algo había pasado. Lo más probable es que fuera porque se dio cuenta de que estaba casando al príncipe heredero. Él no recuerda nada, así que no hay necesidad de causar problemas ni decir nada innecesario. Puede que sea un gambero, pero las balas en el cuerpo del príncipe lo asustaron. Incluso a él. Isabella no esperaba que realmente lo secara. Christopher estaba sentado en el suelo. Su pelaje blanco brillaba mostrando toda su superioridad. El hermano de Isabella lo cuidaba muy bien. Era insoportable para él, ya que todos están reunidos. Su majestad también debe unirse. Todos se sentaron uno frente al otro. Había algo mal con Oliver. Otra vez estaba actuando así a pesar de que conocía la verdadera identidad de Christopher. Isabella preguntó si importaba que Oliver también supiera quién era bueno. Tendrían que vivir juntos por un tiempo. No había nada que pudieran hacer. Él solo confiaría en los Carceles y en nadie más. Justo cuando Oliver estaba a punto de gritar algo, recibió otra bofetada en la nuca. Leonardo se interesó en cómo sucedió esto. Christopher le explicó lo que le pasó, empezando por la situación cuando la emperatriz lo envenenó hasta la historia sobre el efecto de la sangre de Isabella y el deseo de aparearse. Leonardo precisó que cuando bebe la sangre de la duquesa su mente regresa, pero sus heridas también son curadas. Se quedaron en silencio por un momento. La propia Isabel no entiende por qué sucede esto. Leonardo sugirió que si sus heridas se curan entonces también podría funcionar en las heridas de las personas. Tenían curiosidad y querían ver si funcionaría en las personas. Isabella preguntó cuál de ellos quería ser el sujeto de prueba. Oliver se apartó inmediatamente, diciendo que no quería beber su sangre y que cómo era posible que ella tuviera una habilidad tan buena. Isabella, she started to walk towards him, and said she was going to prick his finger. Leonardo took the sword and made a cut. Isabella thought there was no need for so much blood. Oliver said only a little blood was needed, to which Isabella replied that if they wanted to pour blood into the cup, they had to have enough. She placed the glass of blood on the table. Leonard looked at it carefully, then took a small sip. Apparently it's of no use to people. Oliver shouted that the bleeding had to be stopped, so he gives it to Christopher. He just doesn't want to waste it. Marta should be arriving soon. First, they need to check if they can remove the poison the Empress used. She entered the room, greeted everyone, and introduced herself. Her name is Marta Tehran, the only sorceress in the elite division created by Christopher. I am one of the few who knows about his curse. It was created by combining existing poisons with invented ones. That's why you shouldn't mess with them. Of course she is not the main character, so she can't remove the curse. She asked if she could draw some of his blood, but Isabella knew it would be useless, that it wouldn't make any difference since the reason for His Highness's curse wasn't lifted was because the Empress used a special poison. It stands to reason that the curse will be lifted if it is removed from his body. If the poison is removed, the prince will return to a man's body, but when the moon rises again he will turn into a wolf. The Empress knew this, so she sent assassins. If they show up again, Oliver will take a hostage and torture him until he confesses. There is only one way to escape the curse that has been passed down for generations in the imperial family. You just need to meet your mate and spend your entire life with her, and Christopher's mate is Hannah Manu first. They need to get rid of the poison. She knows a mage who specializes in purification. There is a wandering sorceress named Hannah Manu. You just need to find out where she is, and then she will help Christopher. The original story will already be destroyed. They made a mistake by looking for Christopher on their own. Now they have no choice but to find Hannah themselves. It was a bit strange, but Oliver also supported Isabella. They need to find her, and Christopher will stay here for now, but it would be better to move him to a safer place. But no one will dare touch him as long as Isabella is with him from time to time. Isabella would get lazy and skip training, and she'd slit all those rats' throats even if he hadn't asked. She would still be on the case. Leonardo reached out and patted her head, saying, "Well done, Isabella." She felt awkward. A red blush appeared on her cheeks. This is the first compliment she's heard in 6 years. Isabella froze in place. Then Christopher asked her what was wrong. She sits thoughtfully for a while and keeps touching her head. Isabella took and pushed his head away from her, but he just wanted to ask, and she immediately started backing far away, moving away, and not letting him get near her, remembering how he bit her lip. He unconsciously withdrew his hand. It had been a long time since anyone stroked her hair. She and Oliver are brother and sister, but they don't make unnecessary affectionate gestures. The Duke and Duchess keep their distance from them, just like in her first life. Until her death after her early childhood, no one ever caressed her like that again. Christopher sat with a serious face and listened. Attentively to what she was saying, and seeing how important it was to her, he decided to do the same. He placed his paw on her head simply because he had to. Isabella even began to get restless, because it felt like her hair was being pulled out. But it was the paw of her beloved Christopher. He brought his snout close to hers, and she said she would no longer treat him like a dog, because that was wrong. Then Isabella moved even closer, hugged him warmly, and said, "My handsome Christopher." He wondered how often she called him handsome and kind. At that moment, Isabella even took a step back. It seemed he remembered something, but it seemed to her that he didn't remember. It just sounded like something that had already become a habit for him. She turned to him. "Your Highness?" and raised her fist as if making a gesture. Then Isabella asked if he remembered anything. At that moment, Christopher felt rejected and wanted to run away. Maybe it's instinct. He needs to be careful, remembering she called him a mutt. He thinks she will get very angry. Isabella called him handsome and started petting him. He felt so uncomfortable he said it was suffocating. Leonardo went over to talk to Oliver. He asked him to tell him how everything happened, and if he caught him lying, he would make him run 30 laps around the gym, but Oliver caught him only because Isabella wanted to raise a dog. Leonardo also asked what else he did, and it turned out he shot at him. "But he didn't really know if I hadn't brought him here. He would have died there," said Oliver. He was also interested in what Isabella was doing, since it could become a big problem, even if she only wielded a whip. He replied that she hadn't done anything. Oliver understood he needed to protect his sister Isabella, and Oliver are said to be birds of a feather, hedonists with impulsive personalities. A sister and brother who carefully hide from each other when the other is in trouble. And trouble happened often. She gives him first-class food, and in every sentence he hears from her, it's Christopher this, Christopher that. She treats him, walks with him, and even clips his claws all by herself. But this became inappropriate when it was discovered who he is. "She has done a lot, so there is no need to slander her," said Oliver. "Isabella has changed a lot. She stopped arguing with everyone, and she no longer torments the servants furthermore. This business with the magic stones started thanks to her, and the Baron coordinated his actions with Isabella. Now he adores her. Even when she expresses her opinion, he claps like a seal. The Baron seems to be busy, trying to sign a contract with the guild or something similar to what Isabella was talking about. But it's still nice. Now he's much more interested in her than when she was dangerous and unreliable. So much so that he had to leave his job, move to a neighboring kingdom and live at home." Oliver said not to touch her like that, because he might get the wrong idea. Since they haven't seen each other in a long time, as the questions ran out, Oliver decided to leave. Leonardo just stood there and watched him go. While he was away, something changed. The best solution would be to just watch. Isabella picked up a comb to brush Christopher, running her hand through his silver fur again and again. Leonardo watched them closely. A slight tension was visible on his face. Isabella asked if he wanted to say something, but he just told her to continue. She felt awkward continuing under his gaze. Isabella saw that Christopher wanted to sleep, and suggested waking him in an hour so they could go for a walk. Now they had to figure out whose bed it was. Hers or Christopher's. At first he fell asleep because he was on guard, but knowing that he was definitely safe beside her, he fell into a deep sleep. Now he's starting to wonder if this relationship was his bad fate. If it's possible to build a trusting relationship this way. Just as Isabella was about to leave the room, Leonardo asked her to sit down. His first question was, "What happened to you?" But she just answered nothing, except maybe the need to take care of His Highness. He thought for a moment, brought a hand to his face and said, "Is that all?" and fell silent for a couple of seconds. "We've heard many good things about you lately. You've changed your lifestyle and your way of thinking. You're a kind person now." Oliver has noticed it too. The maid entered the room to give Isabella a cup of hot tea. She looked very frightened and her hands were trembling. Isabella noticed the worry on her face. Her hand trembled so much that the teacup fell at her feet, and the maid began to apologize and whimper. Isabella felt guilty. Apparently she had brought her in so close for nothing. The maid ran out of the room. She really has changed. He couldn't imagine this could happen in his absence. Their parents will like it. And he, of course, is also very happy about it. Isabella assumed he was on something, but he was being completely serious. Leonardo stood up, reached out his hand, and placed it on her head. Isabella froze. It turned out this was just a habit of Leonardo's. When he does this, she feels awkward and doesn't know how to react. That same night, they analyzed her blood and got the results. Marta said that if a monster drinks her blood, its body will fill with energy, and its mind will become clear. The blood is so potent that even a small amount can heal wounds. The smell is also sweet, so if a monster smells it, it will run towards it in a nutshell. Su sangre es un afrodisíaco y un tónico para los monstruos. No es de extrañar que cuando los monstruos la ven se vuelven locos y corren hacia ella. Ella a menudo sufría de esto cuando era niña y el lobo también corría hacia ella. Christopher dijo antes que olía bien. Los vinos de su alteza son sangre de demonio, por lo que tiene efecto como dijo Marta Cristobal tiene sangre demoníaca. Su antepasado fue el primer demonio que pisó suelo humano, se casó con una mujer y tuvieron un hijo, el niño nacido de la sangre mezclada de un demonio y un humano. Posee una inteligencia y una fuerza excepcionales. El niño sabía lo bueno que era y creía que tenía derecho a ser emperador. Por lo tanto, al final usurpó el trono. El niño mestizo fue el primer emperador de la familia Idris. En el proceso de apoderarse del trono mató al lobo espiritual que protegía a la familia imperial. El espíritu lobo enfadado lanzó una maldición sobre el emperador. En la noche de luna llena fue maldecido a convertirse en lobo y matar a sus seres queridos. El emperador pensó que esto pasaría en 2 semanas, pero la maldición no desapareció. Al principio volvió a su forma humana después de 15 días. En algún momento comenzó a permanecer como lobo por más y más tiempo hasta que finalmente ya no se convirtió en humano y murió a manos de sus hijos. Con el tiempo la sangre se fue degenerando y no nacieron niños malditos hasta que nació Cristobal, en quien se encarnó el último destello de la maldición, transformándose en lobo cada luna llena si no se sale como el primer emperador. Él también se convertirá en un lobo común y corriente para Christopher. Esto es un rayo caído del cielo, por lo que hizo un escándalo y se abalanzó cuando la vio. La probabilidad es bastante alta, pero antes solo la veía como un trozo de carne fresca. Últimamente también la mira a menudo con una mirada hambrienta, pero esto es mejor que el arroz en los primeros días aquí para que el principio se transforme rápidamente en persona. Se necesita un mago a quien contarle cómo avanza la búsqueda. Leonardo le preguntó, pero esto lleva un poco más de tiempo. Le pidió que se apresurara porque no quedaba mucho tiempo. Oliver estaba sentado con las manos cruzadas frente a él y con el rostro disgustado. Marta se quedó a un lado y comprendió todo lo que estaba pasando. Isabella suspiró profundamente, comprendió que necesitaba esperar un poco. Y ella misma vendría pronto. Hannah Manhwa aparecerá a más tardar en una semana. Ese día Leonard regresó a Yedo. Antes de irse pidió suidad al príncipe y expresó su deseo de verlo en la ceremonia de mayoría de edad. Fue un discurso suave. A diferencia del primer día que habló con dureza y frialdad, tan pronto como desapareció la vigilancia, Oliver se encerró en su habitación con una botella de vino. Y Marta, que permaneció en el ducado, no salió y se dedicó a la investigación para que tampoco la vieran. A medida que Christopher se tranquilizaba, los sirvientes también se acostumbraron a él, aunque el entorno había cambiado. En general, la vida cotidiana era tranquila. Deseaba que otros días pudieran ser así. Los sirvientes que pasaban por la habitación oyeron varios gritos. Isabella le pidió que dejara de hackear esas cosas, no importaba cuánta hambre tuviera. No necesitaba morderle las manos de esa manera. Ella comenzó a controlar su dieta, preocupándose por la salud del príncipe. Y por eso él comenzó a morderle las manos. Ella le tiró un hueso y le dijo muérdelo. Christopher comenzó a rascar la manta con sus garras largas y afiladas. Luego se acercó de manera demostrativa y tiró el jarrón de la mesa con su cola. Tomó la cortina entre los dientes y tiró de ella hacia así. Estaba claramente enojado con Isabella. Isabella miró todo esto, su rostro se ensombreció. Estaba simplemente enojada. Ella lo miró con su mirada furiosa y dijo basta. Luego apretó la mano en un puño y golpeó a Christopher en la cabeza. Era como si hubiera aprendido en algún lugar a estar tan enojado como si realmente quisiera hacerla enojar. Estaba indignado de que ella estuviera regañando al príncipe. Heredero del imperio, dado que es un príncipe, debe comportarse como corresponde, pero ella misma debe tratarlo como a un príncipe. Dijo Christopher. El efecto de la sangre terminó. No duró mucho. En lugar de palabras solo hubo ladridos. Juntando las manos frente al pecho, dijo que no le daría su sangre debido a su comportamiento repugnante. Isabella decidió castigarlo. No le dará su sangre hasta mañana para que se dé cuenta de lo que está haciendo. Christopher se enojó tanto que intentó atacarla y derribarla. Entonces ella lo atrapó y lo echó sobre su hombro. Él claramente no esperaba eso. Girando la cabeza, su mirada cayó sobre la cama y pensó que necesitaba tirarla allí, pero debido a la ira y la rabia que había dentro de ella, accidentalmente lo arrolló contra la pared. Incluso se sintió un poco asustada e incómoda por esta situación. La mirada de Christopher era muy severa y comenzó a ladrar. Ella le pidió que se calmara y hablara con palabras, y así comenzó su juego de la mancha, donde su vida estaba en peligro. En la persona de Christopher llegaron al jardín de invierno. Isabella miró hacia Christopher con cara de miedo. Él se estaba acercando cada vez más a ella. Si los personajes principales estuvieran en su lugar, esta sería una escena romántica, pero aquí está, y este es el momento de una sangrienta batalla por su vida. Christopher la sujetó con su pata y ella solo lo empujó diciendo que no le daría su sangre. Ese día Isabella agitó su puño y lo arrojó lejos de ella un poco hacia un lado. Christopher inclinó la cabeza hacia ella, probablemente muy molesto. Después de la situación ocurrida en la habitación, él continuó sentado frente a ella en la misma posición, solo ladraba silenciosamente y continuaba mirando al suelo. Si no es posible, entonces no es posible. Necesita trabajar en su comportamiento y sus hábitos, le dijo Isabella. Christopher habló todo el día por la injusticia, pero ella todavía no le dio sangre y por la mañana todavía no habló. Hoy le dará sangre si se porta bien. Extendió la mano en la que estaba la pelota, entonces ella giró y lo arrolló hacia un lado, diciéndole a Christopher que lo atrapara e inmediatamente él corrió tras él. Isabella estaba sentada debajo de un árbol. Ya estaba empezando a preocuparse porque él había estado ausente durante mucho tiempo. Pensamientos pasaron por su cabeza de que algo había sucedido, pero entonces Christopher sale volando de entre los arbustos sosteniendo una especie de animal entre sus dientes. Se acercó tranquilamente a Isabella. Christopher trayó algo más que una pelota y ella intentó mirarlo más de cerca. Continuó sosteniéndolo entre sus dientes por un tiempo. Bajó la cabeza más cerca del suelo, abrió un poco la boca y con cuidado la soltó. Era un conejo blanco como la nieve. Ella asumió que con eso estaba insinuando una tregua. Isabella juntó las manos frente a su cara y se preguntó dónde había aprendido a hacer eso. Ella le extendió la mano diciéndole que no lo volviera a hacer. Y luego Christopher bebió su sangre. Pasó un tiempo hasta que la sangre empezó a circular, después de lo cual Christopher dijo que estaba equivocado y que no lo volvería a hacer a su vez. Isabella le pidió disculpas por tratarlo como a un perro y que liberaría al conejo nuevamente en las montañas. Él simplemente lo atrapó vivo. Ella sonrió preguntándose dónde aprendió a ser tan amable. Pero si el propio Cristóbal supiera la respuesta a esta pregunta, si más tarde ocurre lo mismo con su amada, ¿serán felices? Entiendo que Christopher estaba bajo mucho estrés. Ella le hizo prometer que en lugar de comer en exceso haría más ejercicio. Pero eso no significaba que tuvieran que levantarse al amanecer por la mañana. Debe realizar un doble salto. Si continúa comiendo en exceso, se convertirá en un verdadero cerdo. Solo hay que mirar esos bolos gordos que deberían hacer con ellos. Decidieron que correrían juntos. Mañana se escuchó un ruido extraño proveniente de la cocina. Lo más probable es que alguien hubiera entrado y tal vez fueran ladrones. No había ningún arma adecuada cerca para defenderse. No había nada más que hacer. Si acaso tendría que decirle a Christopher que lo mordiera. Isabella abrió la puerta bruscamente. Vieron a una criada que se atiborraba de pan tanto como podía porque tenía hambre. La criada cayó de rodillas, lloró y pidió perdón y misericordia. Ella tiene un hermano enfermo, es la única que paga todos los gastos y le llevaba la cena. Por eso tenía que saltarse comidas y robarles la comida. Isabella se acordó de esta muchacha. Fue ella quien derramó el té y ahora está robando comida. Debo decir que realmente se distinguió, pero aún así es desagradable ver a una chica delgada de rodillas rezando. Por simplificaciones, en ese momento superó. Christopher estaba muy gordo. Ella le preguntó su nombre. Ella respondió: Lydia. Aparentemente ha estado muriendo de hambre todo este tiempo. Hoy es la primera vez que parece tener hambre. Isabella preparó la sopa y la vertió en tazones. Puso un plato en el suelo y el otro en la mesa y les dijo que comieran. La criada no entendió todo correctamente. Rompió a llorar y pidió que no se la comieran. Entiende que es culpable. Ha pecado contra ella 2 veces y tiene mucho miedo de que se la den de comer a Christopher. Hay demasiados rumores circulando. Lately the servants had been feeding Christopher without his knowledge, so he thought everything was fine. But they still thought he was a cannibal. Their Chris eats only the best quality meat. He doesn't need someone like her. So let him eat her. While the maid ate and admired the delicious food, Isabella asked what her brother was sick with. Her doctor said it was an incurable disease with unknown causes. Lydia's parents died, leaving only the 2 of them. Everything seemed very familiar to Isabella. She asked her to eat, to clean, and wished her good night for a while. She couldn't even sleep after this situation. She just stared at the ceiling. Her face was sad. Christopher could immediately tell that she was worried about that maid. He thought it was very sweet because she was very caring. But she didn't think so. That's why she found it cute. The only thing that worried her was if she had been kind to her, because Lydia was lying on the cold floor and was afraid to utter a single word. She has black hair and black eyes, strange as it may seem. Even her previous family background was similar. For no particular reason, Isabella would simply worry about her. She didn't get enough sleep and was constantly rubbing her eyes. She was thinking so much about that maid that she couldn't fall asleep. She asked Grace if she knew Lydia, her brother, was sick. She replied that it had been about a year. The butler took pity on Lydia and sent a doctor, but in the end the cause was not found. The doctor sent by the butler had to be a competent person, and without knowing the cause, it's impossible to cure the disease. Grace noticed that her lady was worried about Lydia. She was so thin, skin and bones, and didn't look her age. She is only 17 years old, but Isabella thought she was 15, and she's only 1 year younger. This is even more disturbing. But you can't worry so much about the fate of your subordinates because you already have enough of your own business. She turned to Marta for help. She wants to see a patient with an incurable disease of unknown origin. They agreed to meet after lunch. Christopher and Isabella exchanged glances. She told him not to say anything. She just asked if she would take him with her. He is worried that something might happen while she's away, and she must protect him because he is weak. She was surprised that he considered himself weak. Even though he chased her all over the house and she barely defended herself then before leaving, he would walk twice as much, news that he didn't like too much. He turned around and said he was tired and walked away. She smiled because she knew that would happen. Then she carried him on her shoulders and told him that couldn't be done because he had promised. Lydia approached the room and knocked on the door. She asked what happened. She has a sick brother at home. She wants to see if he can be cured. Then she introduces Marta, this girl, a great sorceress. They greeted each other and went on their way. You shouldn't have gotten into the carriage right after eating. Now you feel sick. This house seemed very familiar to her. The maid felt disgusted coming here, but for her it was a normal house. She asked where her brother was. He was in a room on the 2nd floor. There was a guy lying on the bed. He looked like a skeleton. Lydia said his name was Eugene. That name sounded very familiar to her, and she began to remember Eugene Mel was Lydia's brother. In the original story, he becomes Hannah's apprentice, and he is the one who will take her to the duchy. Right at that moment, they are supposed to meet Christopher. And this house is familiar to her, because it's the first place Hannah arrives. Hannah's meeting with Eugene in the original Eugene was on the verge of death, and Hannah took him under the orders of the master of the mage tower and then cured him. However, the thoughts about how he would wait for her in that state gave her no peace. He could die any day from now on, or tomorrow. Marta realized what had caused Eugene's illness. It's called anemia, a disease caused by the blockage of the blood vessel. Due to non-circulating mana, he vomits blood, a common disease among beginner mages. And in severe cases, death is possible to cure him. It's necessary to prick him at an acupuncture point. It's surprising that he has lasted a whole year. Usually even 3 months are hard to last. This shows how large his volume of mana is. He increases it even more. Marta noticed that something was wrong with Isabella. If Eugene is cured now, Hannah will not enter the duchy. Eugene is no longer in danger of dying. Even if they left him as he is, he would not die but for Christopher to return to a human body. Hannah is absolutely necessary. Grace asked if they were successful. Apparently it's such a serious disease that it's already too late to treat my brother. Tears flowed from her eyes like a stream. Isabella found it hard to see her tears. She approached Christopher. He had been watching her from the beginning. I watched her. I believed and trusted in her and her help. She bent down, bowed her head to him, and addressed Christopher. Your Highness, Isabella asked him not to worry, because she would do everything possible, placing her hand on her heart. She said she would definitely free him from the curse. Her hand reached out to his face gently and affectionately. Then she got closer, tilted her head slightly and kissed his forehead. This confused Christopher a little. He even felt lost. If she says so, he will have to believe her. If she fails to find Hannah, Christopher will be in big trouble. But Isabella knew she might regret her decision. She stood up and asked Marta to cure Eugene. She understood that she had upset the whole plan with her own hands. She would have to take responsibility for this. Marta looked at her and replied, Yes, ma'am. Grace began to thank her. As tears of joy formed in her eyes, Isabella didn't know that Eugene was Lydia's brother to keep the fact of his recovery a secret. She asked Lydia to come up with a believable story. Now they will have to concentrate all their efforts on finding Hannah. By themselves, thanks to this boy, she was able to summon a sorceress, Christopher. He asked if this would help in any way with his curse. She said no, but she promised to break the curse now. She already regrets it. He didn't know that this boy was her maid's brother. She just found out his name today and can't stop thinking about him. The Duchess's choice was wise, but she said she would definitely lift the curse, and he believes in these words. She was moved by these words. Even if the sorceress ends up in hell, he will get her out of there or catch her at the entrance to hell. Isabella asked him to trust her and hugged him. She is a good fisherwoman and will definitely succeed. At night, she fell into a deep sleep. Christopher went out and walked around the castle. He doesn't even know why the Duchess is so in love with him. Maybe she thinks of him as her puppy, but right now he feels safer here because he is Chris, and she strokes his fur and kisses him. He remembered that situation in the house when she sat down and kissed him on the forehead. Christopher blushed and was a little angry remembering that kiss, as if it were for a 3-year-old. How embarrassing. He feels it's interesting and comfortable with the Duchess, a kind smile and a helping hand, warm words, all the tenderness she gives. He had never had anything like it before. They can't get any closer. If he becomes dependent on her, there will be no turning back. The maid saw Chris and ran to him. She asked him if my lady was asleep. He was surprised that she was out of breath even after such a short run. If Isabella had been there, she would have picked him up and carried him back. Lydia asked him why he was walking alone at this hour, and then asked him what he liked best. Meat, fish, or maybe fruit? But she knows exactly what my lady likes. He turned around and said he wouldn't eat Isabella. Lydia covered her mouth with her hand when she realized she was saying too much. And at that moment, Christopher definitely realized his mistake. In the end, he told Lydia, although no one should know. She looked at him thoughtfully. Then she added, smiling, Of course he's very interested in her. He asked her how she knew he could talk. Lydia calmed down a bit and said to tell the truth, last night, she heard them talking before the lady got into the carriage. You were worried about my lady's health. Your anxiety was noticeable in your tense gaze. Christopher asked if she knew who he was. His voice was calm, but his eyes were full of worry. She answered with a question, the great wolf spirit. This answer suited him because the less she knows, the more soundly she sleeps. It was his fault because he had relaxed too much in his peaceful life, and he mentally reproached himself for his carelessness. That could have cost him dearly. She wanted to ask him something else. Her gaze became curious, almost playful. ¿Qué es lo que más le gusta a mi lady? Él respondió con seguridad que sí, una sonrisa orgullosa apareció en su rostro, como si no tuviera dudas en sus palabras, y entonces me di cuenta de la estupidez que acababa de decir. Él sabe que Isabella lo valora mucho. Ay, es poco probable que se equivoque al respecto. Ella decidió preguntar por un regalo para ella. Pensó en el pastel de manzana. Ella es omnívora, pero el otro día comí tarta de manzana con muchísima hambre. Entonces se dio cuenta de que no podía contarle tanta ternura porque era un lobo serio. Hier le agradeció por compartirla, y luego decidió dejarlo y seguir adelante. Pensó que un tonto así no podía ser un espía de la emperatriz. En lugar de cerebro tenía la cabeza llena de flores. Cristóbal se dio cuenta de que era hora de regresar porque ya era hora de despertar. Mientras caminaba notó que el interior de la mansión estaba desordenado después de todo los asesinos podrían aparecer nuevamente. Cuando empezó a acercarse a las escaleras vio a un hombre, el hombre lo miró con miedo y llamó a su dama, la encontró con la boca abierta. Isabella corrió hacia él, le irritaba que él volviera a estar en camisón, quien podía correr delante de todos solo en ropa interior. Pensó Isabella, lo agarró, lo echó sobre su hombro y entró en la habitación. La criada los observó con la boca abierta. Los demás servicios también se acercaron. Christopher comenzó a regañarla por usar camisón, lo que le irritó porque había muchos hombres afuera. Pero él le hizo una contrapregunta sobre dónde había ido desde la mañana. Estaba asustada por su repentina desaparición. Busqué por cada rincón de la casa pensando que algo podría haber sucedido, incluso se sintió un poco avergonzado. Y pensó nuevamente que mantendría la distancia, pero levado por el amor sin límites que Isabel derrama volvió a perder la cabeza. Ella lo llamó su alteza y luego ella le preguntó por qué estaba en silencio, es como si se hubiera vuelto loco. Ella es más joven que él, ni siquiera tiene 18 años, al parecer estaba pensando en perder peso por lo que salió antes del amanecer. Más tarde habrá que ir directo a la mesa, jaló su costado para mostrar, entonces ella empezó a hacerle cosquillas. Con las palabras gordo a él realmente no le gustó, ella siempre ha sido así. Una chica traviesa a la que le encanta burlarse de la gente, se siente como si ni siquiera viera a una persona dentro de él. Y que solo pudiera pensar en algo. Ella notó que Christopher estaba un poco molesto y dijo que estaba bromeando. Su príncipe lobo era el más guapo, pero agregó que como persona era mucho más guapo. Isabella dijo por supuesto, ya que el lobo es hermoso, entonces como persona debe ser aún más encantador. La corrigió, no más encantador sino más hermoso. Christopher se dio cuenta de que ella parecía estar calmando al perro que hacía pucheros. Él preguntó cuándo se convirtiera en humano si ella continuaría llamándolo guapo o bueno. Esta pregunta la sorprendió Isabella. Asintió y dijo que cuando regresara a su forma humana su relación no cambiaría. Quedó satisfecho con esta respuesta. Algún día no se convertirá ni en la ama ni en el lobo, y alguien mucho más cercano algún día se acostó al lado de Isabella y puso su pata sobre su mano. Es su culpa el karma. ¿Cómo puede esconderse también el paradero de Hannah aún es desconocido? Y pensó que si escuchaba rumores sobre Eugene definitivamente aparecería. El problema es que ya ha cambiado completamente los acontecimientos del original. Ella notó que Christopher caminaba hacia ella, él se acercó y apoyó la cabeza sobre sus pies. Y luego la miró muy suavemente como si quisiera pedirle atención. Todo le pareció tan lindo que no pudo evitar murmurar. Con una sonrisa era de esperarse, pero no fue fácil aceptarlo. Isabella también le pidió que no se preocupara, porque tarde o temprano Hannah definitivamente sería atrapada. Ella era increíblemente buena pescando, agregó Christopher con una leve sonrisa. Como si eso lo explicara todo, Isabella levantó una ceja. Su voz ligeramente escéptica. Había captado algo, pero ella lo atrapó. Isabella pensó que había escuchado mal, no esperaba esas palabras de Christopher. Ella dijo que era una broma. Él la interrumpió y le dijo que honestamente había entendido todo correctamente. De repente se emocionó y ella estaba a punto de atrapar. Hannah parece que ya ha perdido el interés por los peces que pescaba en sus zonas de pesca, pero quien dijo que podía venir a las zonas de pesca a voluntad. Lo dejó ir una vez que lo atrapó, tuvo que asumir la responsabilidad y portarse bien. Isabella le pidió que fuera a otro lugar, pero a donde podría ir sin ella. El ruido en la habitación irritó a Oliver y les dijo que salieran si querían hablar. Él le preguntó si era posible encontrarse con un lobo, algún tipo de deseo sexual anormal. Pero él le preguntó si le habían dado su cabeza como decoración. Ella era una completa tonta. Están con su alteza. Christopher se acercó a él y luego dijo que le permitiría quedarse todo el día en la bodega real. Isabella pensó por un momento que había escuchado mal. Parpadeó como si tratara de sacudirse la sorpresa, y su voz vaciló porque no esperaba tales palabras de Christopher. Golpeó la mesa y preguntó cuándo su hermana se había vuelto tan pervertida, pero ella respondió que él era guapo, la trataba bien, solo la escuchaba a ella. Se había encarinado un poco y estaba bastante alerta por la noche. Todo eso le gustaba. Y que se necesitaba dinero para cuidar a una criatura tan dulce, pero que no necesitaba nada de él. Tenía mucho dinero propio. Christopher y Oliver no sabían qué responder, y este sangre noble. Eso debería ser suficiente. Entonces Christopher preguntó qué pasaría si él tuviera más dinero, mucho más que ella. El dinero va al dinero. Ahora se tomarán de la mano e irán a la ceremonia. Dinero a dinero, dices, dijo Oliver. Luego tomará un arma y destruirá todo a su alrededor. Agregó también que ni siquiera debería pensar en caminar hacia el altar del brazo. Después de estas palabras, Cristóbal lo empujó tan fuerte que le dolió el brazo. Isabel le preguntó a su alteza ¿cuándo se había vuelto tan pervertido? Ella es una persona sana y fuerte, capaz de defenderse por sí misma. Incluso si él no puede acudir en su ayuda y ella no necesita protección, pensó Isabella. Isabella definitivamente romperá la maldición, aunque Hannah también está sana, no es tan fuerte como Christopher quisiera. Ella le preguntó por su apariencia o carácter, a lo que respondió una persona sensible, de cabello rojo y ojos esmeralda. Oliver se sorprendió de que alguien pudiera ser tan franco. Ella se sorprendió mucho y dijo de verdad, mira así a su hermano Leonardo, es fuerte, sano, pelirrojo y tiene ojos color esmeralda. Ella realmente no sabe si él es sensible, pero definitivamente se trata de su hermano. Luego Christopher dijo que en este momento solo quiere matarla. Oliver comenzó a reír a carcajadas y añadió que probablemente era por desesperación, era simplemente imposible. Isabella no entendía que le pasaba y la fiesta del terminó rápidamente. Oliver terminó siendo mordido por Christopher por burlarse de él. Después de esto, Christopher enfurunado se dirigió a su habitación. Marta se acercó y preguntó por su preocupación por esa hechicera. Si había algún rastro podrían rastrearla. Eugene entró en la habitación y saludó a todos. Ella se alegró de que él estuviera mejor cuando se conocieron. Él era piel y hueso, su estado mejoró rápidamente. A esto no podía dejar de agradarle, su tez se volvió más saludable, sus ojos brillaron. Y sus movimientos recuperaron su antigua facilidad. Todo es gracias a Isabella, definitivamente le agradecerá su amabilidad. Incluso está dispuesto a dar su vida, pero no hay necesidad de ello. Eugene le entregó una taza de té de la que se elevaba un ligero vapor de té aromático. En algún momento ella le agarró la mano. En su muñeca levaba una pulsera hecha de hilo, decorada con un lirio. Se preguntó de dónde la había sacado. Lo consiguió en el pueblo. Alguien dijo que sería muy bueno para la salud. Inmediatamente se dio cuenta de que era Hannah había legado al ducado. Isabella le preguntó cuándo había conseguido la pulsera. Preguntó intentando mantener la calma, a lo que él respondió. Hace 2 días, sin siquiera sospechar la tormenta de emociones que sus palabras provocaron. Marta le pidió a Eugene que le prestara la pulsera por un rato. Si ayuda, entonces por supuesto sería bueno que se quedara en el ducado. Pero simplemente seguir el rastro sería suficiente. Marta dice que puede ser rastreada. Ella necesita contarle esto a Christopher pronto. Al estar feliz, Isabella corrió a toda velocidad. Su corazón latía salvajemente en su pecho. Parecía que incluso el aire a su alrededor resonaba con su impaciencia. Con alegría abrió las puertas de la habitación con un movimiento brusco, casi arrancándolas de las bisagras. Sus ojos brillaban de anticipación y esperanza, pero la habitación la recibió con un silencio sepulcral. Estaba vacía. Christopher no estaba allí, solo las cortinas ondeando junto a la ventana abierta y una ligera brisa. Isabella no podía creer lo que veía y se quedó allí en estado de shock. Maldito perro, espetó entre dientes, con la voz temblorosa por la rabia y la frustración. No te escuchara en absoluto. When she went out, she started to shout his name. Suddenly she heard footsteps behind her, followed by a male voice calling her. Isabella turned around sharply. He asked her how she was, and it was Alan. He had completely blossomed. During the time they hadn't seen each other, she was ready to scream in fear when she saw him. Isabella asked him if he had seen Christopher, and he said he had seen him walking towards the back entrance with the maid recently. These words bothered her. It seems he became friends with this maid. She remembers how the maid invited Christopher to various tasty snacks. He asked her what she would do if she had to keep communicating with him as a dog, to which Lydia replied that she would be happy to be my lady's dog. He said he shouldn't have asked. Isabella was outraged that they were together and even communicating. She walked quickly towards them with a very displeased face. Isabella asked what happened. Was it consensual or was it forced? She will never tell anyone. She can keep it a secret until she dies. Christopher said to just forget it because this fool doesn't know anything anyway. Isabella thought he was still angry with her because he kept looking away. She thanked Lydia for the apple pie. She liked it very much. She was happy to hear praise from her lady. Lydia decided to leave them so they could talk to each other. They watched her leave as soon as she was gone. Isabella asked what they had done to him, but Christopher wasn't going to answer. It was their secret now. He had grown up. Isabella had good news and they were on Hannah's trail. But there is even better news. She handed him the bracelet she took from Eugene. He looked at it and said that women are good. She didn't understand at all what he was talking about now. Maybe it's about the situation when she asked about his brother. Apparently she is still worried about it. She hugged him, caressed him, and told him it was just a joke. That's probably why he left her and walked away. But Christopher knew that Isabella would follow him. She just went to see Marta. She needed to comfort him and leave together. His Highness behaves like a small child. He jumped at the word Isabella and bit, but she repeatedly asked him not to bite his lips. So he scolded her with unpleasant things. Blood started to flow from her lip, and then he asked if he could lick it. She leaned in and told him that as soon as the bleeding stopped, he should move away immediately. It looked like a kiss again. If she kisses, she wants to do it with a handsome man. But he is only a man at heart. But on the outside, he's a dog. He asked if her blood would still be tasty to him when he became human. But she didn't know the answer to that question. He would test it himself someday. He asked without biting. She replied, "Yes, your majesty, you will do as you please since you left the house." To take her for a walk today. They were going to climb to the very top. He asked if she wanted to bet who would get there first. He also clarified what Christopher would be betting on. He said the loser would grant the winner's wish. Isabella asked that these wishes not be too strange. She put her foot on the ground and said start. But that's against the rules. Isabella ran as fast as she could to defeat Christopher the wolf. You just have to be cunning at that moment. He suddenly caught up with her. But she said the game had to be played in a human way. Right on target he can't. He needs to take a shortcut and catch up. She stopped to look around. But then I heard a strange noise behind me. It was a huge animal similar to a wolf, but with a bird's face. The beast was determined, looking at Isabella with a fierce gaze. This mountain is used for regular hikes, but apparently it's all because of her blood. She drew her sword and attacked first. Her swing was decisive because she never doubted herself. She cut off its head, but it didn't die. Only a black liquid flowed onto the ground. She needs to win before it recovers. She raised her sword and said either she or it would win, but no one would surrender. After the subsequent blows, Isabella remained in a stance as if she were waiting for it to get back on its feet. The animal remained lying down, its entire body covered in scratches, and the black liquid was scattered all over the ground. Suddenly she heard another rustle and turned her head. Christopher came flying out of the bushes calling her name. She didn't expect to see His Highness so quickly. If he hadn't warned her, she might have attacked him. Christopher expected her to complain again, but it seemed she was handling it well. She stood there puzzled, wondering how he knew. There was a strong smell of blood everywhere. He couldn't help but notice she had destroyed the very core. It wasn't easy to do that, Isabella. She didn't know what a core was, and in her ignorance she cut it to pieces. In fact, that's what happened, and she cut it until it died. Christopher started to laugh out loud, and she really is something, the first person to kill a chimera, without even knowing about its core. If he had arms, he would have given her a standing ovation, and she thought it was a compliment. But for some reason she felt uncomfortable after his words. There are two possibilities for why the monster is here. The first is that the monster came here from the northern mountains, and the second option is that it's the work of the Empress. This vaguely reminds Isabella of the original and Empress, a sorceress who commands familiars, mostly birds, especially crows, unable to communicate with large animals due to her limited abilities. She's obsessed with creating chimeras that obey her orders. Chimera, the monster that she killed. Because it's an artificially created monster, the probability of it appearing is much lower in the north. They need to go down and tell Oliver everything. Halfway down the mountain, she and Christopher decided to turn back. It would have been nice if they had simply returned to the mansion. But now it was His Highness's turn. Not even 5 minutes had passed since she had killed the monster, and he had already finished off several. She doesn't even know where their cores are, which is why it takes her a long time to destroy them. It's definitely the Empress's work. She released them. Christopher looked at her with sweet eyes and said it was too much for him, but that wouldn't work on her now. He was upset that it didn't work. Then Christopher called Isabella his lady. This made her feel very displeased. Then he continued saying that she can't kill them instead of Christopher. But Christopher is very scared. He wants a hug. It's funny that he can catch everyone himself. He has nothing to worry about. She asked him not to pretend to be someone else. Christopher left her here. Only one snake was left. A fucking wolf bird. It sounded too rude. Besides, she stepped on a black substance as they went down. The first thing they did was report this to Oliver. And upon hearing about the chimera, Oliver took the knights and went up the mountain. Marta followed him to find the place where the monsters were coming from. Everyone has a lot to do. It's a shame Isabella can't go out again. Christopher asked her what she was drawing. She showed him a drawing where she tried to depict him. But Christopher hoped it wasn't him the animal show the kindergarten. He shouldn't lie because he doesn't look that wrinkly. But she thinks she did a good job portraying Christopher. Someone knocked on the door. She allowed them to enter. It was Eugene. He brought good news for Isabella. They managed to find the sorceress Hannah Manhwa. Isabella couldn't believe that after waiting so long to meet her, they had managed to find her. She is no longer in the duchy. But fortunately, she is still in the north, said Eugene. Tomorrow at dawn, the master will pick her up. I will leave you now. Christopher looked at him with a somewhat angry expression. Isabella took his head in her hands and turned to him. Your Highness, tomorrow you can return to your true form. Morning will come and you will return. Now this is really the end of her life with Christopher. If he hadn't turned into a wolf, she would never have had the chance to communicate with the prince. Christopher looked at her with pitiful eyes. They had been waiting for this for so long, and they should be happy. But still, it's a shame Isabella grew much more fond of him than she expected. So she didn't want to take him under her protection, not even temporarily. Christopher noticed that Isabella had a very warm look in her eyes today. He said that since today is the last day, she should remember it. So as not to forget anything, he said it as if he were going to die. Isabella knew he wouldn't die. But if he managed to imprint on Hannah, she wouldn't be able to see him anymore. So she needed to do this right. She took his snout, drew him toward her, and kissed him softly on the nose. A goodnight kiss and a farewell kiss, she said. She wished him sweet dreams. It's very difficult for her to sleep while hugging Christopher when she turned over in the morning. Her hand touched Christopher. But while sleeping, she did not understand what kind of texture it was. The fur had disappeared. He would be glad if she stopped touching him. Isabella opened her eyes to see better. She jumped up screaming with a huge surprise on her face. Christopher took her hand, and then said good morning. She noticed the silver hair and golden eyes. Then she realized she was lying in the same bed. With a naked prince, Isabella even doubted if this was really her Christopher. When he stood up, she suddenly jumped back. Because he was completely naked, everyone could hear screams from the room. He asked her to calm down a bit. But right now, she could not be calm. She asked him why he suddenly turned human, but he did not know himself. He opened his eyes and he was human. Perhaps the poison the Empress used on him had been absorbed, but then it turns out there is no need to look for Hannah anymore. They were a meter apart. Christopher wanted to ask her a question. He was curious if she thought he was handsome. Only his lower half was covered and he looked like a pervert. But of course the main character is a bit different. She answered that she did. She did not understand where all of Christopher's fat had gone. He had covered himself because she was looking at him mischievously. But then Isabella started prodding his chest. She asked him to wait a moment. She needed to go find Oliver. And Isabella went downstairs. She could not believe how this could happen. The reunion she had imagined with respect for the now human Christopher. Dressed, of course, but as they say, dreams are a dime a dozen. Most likely he had imprinted on her and not on Hannah. As it should have been, imprinting happens in 2 stages. Love and psychological affection for the partner and physical attraction constitute an imprint. Physical at the moment, these 2 conditions are met, but she did not feel either of them even after saying goodbye to him last night. She did not feel loved. Christopher came out of the room holding a robe in his hand. He came up behind her and threw it on her, because one should not walk around in underwear. She should not be half covered, but look who is talking. She sent him back to his room and ordered him not to leave the door slammed shut. And he froze in place. Christopher's appearance had scared her. She urgently needed to wake up Oliver. She entered the room and was not surprised that he was still sleeping, even though it was already 11 o'clock. She is a night owl too, but he is a much bigger one. Isabella shouted his name. He jumped up and asked what had happened. Then she answered that His Highness had turned into a man. He asked about the sorceress if she had arrived at the castle. But her answer was no. He was just sleeping and woke up as a man. Oliver wondered how it was possible how he could just wake up a man. Isabella got scared. She opened her eyes and there was his chest. Oliver grabbed his sword. Isabella asked him what he was going to do. He said there was a naked man in her room in her bed, and he could not react any other way. He had wild eyes. He repeated, naked chest beast, His Highness. His Highness the Prince, the damn bastard. I knew it. It was wrong for a damn dog to share a bed with a human. She started to reassure him that nothing had happened, and asked him to lower his sword. He said she was not even 18 yet. Isabella still managed to take the sword from his hands. She asked him to calm down and go get his clothes. Isabella asked him to watch the prince now. If a man leaves his room without clothes, rumors will surely spread. She asked him to wait in the room, and she started to rush him. He clenched his fists and said he would go say hello. There was a problem. If he could not contain himself in front of the prince, Isabella hoped it would not lead to a fight, because it would not be easy to contain his emotions, especially when it came to Oliver. Christopher sat on the sofa waiting. His face was satisfied. He was not thinking about anything in particular, but he did not expect to see her face like that. It was very cute. He will have to figure out how to keep it that way. Because now he was imprinted, it was a fact, and there was no escaping it last night. When I opened my eyes, I was surprised to see my human hands. The fact that I have returned to my body, the imprinting with Isabella, all of this means that the condition for imprinting and attachment was met. Although she loved Chris the wolf, the tender kiss Isabella gave him at night was apparently the trigger. He walked to the window and thought, I will start from here. Frankly, their relationship is not simple, because to her he is still nothing more than a pet dog, most likely. She will probably be embarrassed by his sudden transformation into a human and run away afraid of being imprinted on. He needs to approach her quietly and carefully, so that when she wakes up, she's already in his arms and has no thoughts of escaping. He heard the door open and turned, saying, come in, Isabella. But a big surprise awaited him. It was Oliver. They stood and stared at each other. Christopher asked what he was doing there, and Oliver suggested that he was surely expecting someone else. He turned to Oliver and told him he had to be direct, that it was her innocence that had been stolen. Now I wonder how Christopher's relationship with Hannah will evolve. He became human before he even met her. But according to the rules of the novel, they are supposed to fall in love with each other. They are the main characters. Everything should be fine. Someone called her and she turned her head. It was Christopher. He was wearing a white shirt and classic black trousers. It suited him very well. He asked her if she liked the style. But even if he wore a rug, he would still look great after these words. Oliver cleared his throat so they would not forget he was there. He told everyone that His Highness, the prince, had stopped at the Duchy of Carcel to receive health treatment. This was strange and they might suspect something. But his butler should take care of that. Isabella asked him not to stand but to sit down next to her and pointed to the spot beside her. Apparently she still thinks of him as her little dog. But since she offered, he would not refuse. With a sharp movement, Oliver sat right between them. Thankful they had left room for her brother, he asked them to be patient, and to call her older brother now. Oliver turned to the ball and asked to see Leonardo's face. He said, Your Highness, everything was a success. It is a great relief. Christopher in turn asked how he was. Rumors of trouble with him had spread not only in Guedo, but also on the outskirts. The duchy is still quiet, but we must protect him until his coming-of-age ceremony. They asked when they should expect him. But he had too many matters to attend to. The man shouted for His Highness to return now, or he would resign. Isabella covered her ears at the shouting. Christopher said he would have to do it himself then, because he was finding his stay here very interesting. On the day of His Majesty's birthday celebration, he would like to see the look on the Empress's face when she sees this. It was a chimera. The Empress sent it down to the mountain behind the duchy. At the very least, Isabella could have been hurt. Leonardo began to worry about his sister and asked how she was. Isabella came closer and greeted him, saying His Highness was joking and that she had defeated the chimera herself. And how could he have fallen for something like that? He understood them. He asked them to contact him as soon as he arrived, that he would come out to meet him. And he also praised Oliver and Isabella. Oliver started shouting at him not to say that, and to get him out of there. But only one word came from the ball, that they should continue in the same spirit. Oliver got up from his seat. Very sad. Isabella looked at Christopher and invited him to go out with her. He accepted immediately without a second thought. While Oliver was with the ball trying to reach Leonardo, they quickly disappeared from his sight. The whole castle could hear screams that there was a damn dog in his house. Oliver had to tolerate Christopher in the mansion, and instead of eating, he started to drink heavily. If he was just going to drink, what was the point of following her to the dining room? The liquid was just running straight down his throat without any need for snacks. The snacks were on the table. Right in front of him, Christopher was enjoying his meal, and Oliver was glaring at him, holding the bottle in his hand. As if waiting for him to choke, the director asked Oliver not to be too offended by him, because they would soon become very close. Oliver asked me not to say such foolish things. He probably only says that because he recently changed his mind. He must understand that just yesterday he was a dog. It would be better if he had stayed a dog. Christopher had not decided yet. He also turned to Isabella, and then looked at her as if he were flirting. And he asked if she thought he was handsome to her. He was so handsome, she could not even describe it in words. Oliver was indignant. If the face was good, the rest should be good too. He asked not to say such nonsense, because the body must also be beautiful. Christopher suggested going to the cellar, but this time it wouldn't work. He would let him drink as much wine as he wanted. Oliver thought about it, because how could he refuse such an offer? Christopher then asked if their dialogue was over. Without waiting for an answer, he broke off a piece of the fluffy cake, and with unexpected tenderness approached Isabella. With the clear intention of feeding her with his own hands, Isabella opened her mouth mechanically, but at that very moment, someone's hand appeared between them. Oliver intercepted the fork with a triumphant look, and brought the treat to his sister, and began to feed her himself, saying, "Your brother will treat you." She grabbed his face, her eyes shining, and then asked what he was doing. Isabella stood up and started yelling at him because he was truly sick. And she grabbed his jaw so hard it hurt. But he can't just watch them fall in love. Isabella considered those words to be complete nonsense. If he was drunk, he should go to his room to sleep. What he was thinking would never happen, she added, rolling her eyes because she and the prince were just friends. She grabbed him by the nape of his neck. But Oliver immediately started babbling, I'm sorry, I won't do it again." His tone was so pathetic that even Christopher snorted involuntarily. Isabella turned and suggested that His Highness should go and leave Oliver there. Since he had managed to get on everyone's nerves, she turned to him again, because he ignored her. He had a sort of angry and gloomy face. He asked where she was going. Isabella did not expect such a response to her question. Christopher stood up with an unreadable face. "Maybe you could just leave me here," he suggested coldly, with irritation clearly evident in his voice. Isabella felt a deep disappointment. Had she done something wrong? These thoughts immediately assaulted her, but she couldn't figure out what she had done wrong. His gaze was so icy that she even thought he might kill her on the spot. What was happening to him, she thought. At that moment, Marta entered the room. Upon seeing the prince, her eyes widened. She asked how Christopher became human again, blurting it out in complete bewilderment. But somehow it just happened. She didn't expect it to happen today, and why not a day earlier? If it was going to happen? And they forgot, what a shame. But first she had to ask about the main character. Marta straightened up and said in a professional tone that Hannah was waiting for them in the living room. Isabella immediately jumped to her feet. "We have to go in now," she said sharply, looking at Christopher. Her tone left no room for objections. From the first meeting, everything went wrong. She couldn't manage to imprint. "I thought if he just got used to her face, then everything would work out." Hannah curtsied and greeted everyone. She made an elegant curtsy, smiling from ear to ear, and introduced herself. "Hello, I'm Hannah Manu. I'm very happy to finally meet you in person." Looking at her in person, Isabella saw that she was as neat as her name. She said with a smile on her face that they needed her help. Pointing to Christopher, she said that this guy had been poisoned and asked her to take a look. Everyone was shocked because he rested his head on her shoulder. Isabella was irritated that he was behaving this way in front of a guest. Hannah covered her mouth with her hand and said, "Oh my God." She asked for his hand, but what did she expect? She then asked Isabella to take it for her, because he was scared. But she wasn't scary at all, although Christopher suddenly flinched, as if in front of him wasn't an elegant lady but a real monster. What was wrong with him today? She thought with desperation. Marta said that Sir Christopher was a coward despite his appearance. What could a man called the terror of the battlefield be afraid of? Finally, Hannah managed to take his hand, but he didn't let go of Isabella's hand either. When he was Chris, she could only feel his fur-covered paws. Now his arms were so long that it was all somehow amazing. She looked at his face. White and silver hair and beautiful yellow eyes. Isabella asked if he was in pain or not because his eyes were red. He said it was because of her. The examination was over. Christopher abruptly pulled his hand away. "There's nothing to worry about," Hannah said. "There are no signs of poisoning. He's completely healthy." They couldn't relax until they had a diagnosis. Although she was glad he had no problem, Hannah then continued speaking. The reason he was healthy. Her voice sounded mysterious, as if she were revealing a mysterious secret. "There's a monster in him. No, more precisely, it's a demon." Hannah straightened up, her eyes lighting up with professional interest. She added, "Or rather, demonic blood flows through his veins." They sat and listened attentively. A tense silence filled the room, holding their breath, listening to every word. Even the air seemed thick with unasked questions. Christopher asked if she could see that, but she could see much more. She tilted her head to the side. Her voice was filled with genuine interest. Then she asked even more. Hannah sees the connection between them, as well as the fact that she is unstable. Isabella sat there, her gaze filled with bewilderment, shifting from Hannah to Christopher and back again. She didn't understand what connection she was talking about. Fragments of thoughts swirled in her head, but none of them formed a logical picture. Marta looked at her and then asked what she was talking about, but she had no answer to that question. Christopher approached Hannah and grabbed her chin. "You seem to have talent and a good eye." Christopher laughed coldly, his fingers squeezing Hannah's chin lightly. "But you know, people who say words like that don't usually last long." He whispered so low that only the two of them could hear. A dangerous spark flashed in his eyes. Isabella didn't understand how this could be happening to the main character. Aren't the two of them supposed to fall in love? She thought, If she had known how presumptuous she was, he would have kept quiet. She apologized. Christopher loosened his fingers and leaned back casually on the sofa. Crossing his hands in front of him, his posture radiated a kind of restlessness, but the tension in the air still hung like the silence before a storm. Then he turned to Marta, and she immediately understood everything. Pretending to be busy, she announced too loudly, "We really have to go." Trying to calm the situation, she put her hand on Hannah's shoulder, hinting that it was time for them to leave. The sorceress silently stood up and left, and Isabella watched her go. Isabella asked him what was wrong with Christopher, to which he replied that she was being too arrogant. They couldn't even get close, let alone imprint. She had hoped that Christopher would at least see her as someone who was helping him. She didn't think she would be cursed at by an arrogant person. Isabella stood up and was about to leave when he took her hand and asked where she was going. She replied that she needed to say goodbye to Hannah properly. Christopher looked at her as if she were a child. "Thank you for the clarification," is what he was expected to say. She had called her over, so she definitely needed to say goodbye properly. Turning and looking at Christopher, she said she would be back soon. Isabella managed to catch up with Hannah. The sorceress in turn curtsied and apologized for not being able to help. But in reality, she wasn't the one who should be apologizing. Isabella herself apologized for inviting her over only to have her treated badly. Hannah said she was very kind, but that Christopher was very kind too. It's just that he probably wasn't in a good mood today, and she hoped her own mood wasn't too ruined by this. His displeasure was understandable, because she was very self-assured. "Don't worry, it's all right," Hannah said softly, and Isabella felt a weight lift from her soul. She was actually happy to hear that. Maybe it wasn't so bad. She thought Hannah extended her hands with a smile on her face. Isabella extended hers back without thinking. Something about the gesture felt right, as if it was meant to be. They stood holding hands. At some point, something magical began to happen. Hannah noticed that Isabella was no less special than him. Her blood attracted demons. It turns out they are very similar in this regard then. Isabella flinched as if burned and pulled away sharply, breaking contact. Her hands trembling and her heart pounding in her chest. But Hannah simply smiled at her. In the original story, this must have been the reason Christopher attacked Hannah. The pheromones were probably in the alluring scent of her blood, Hannah explained in a low voice, as she watched Isabella turn pale. "I don't know what your life was like before," Hannah said, looking down. But Hannah's life was not the most peaceful. She just said it was better to stay away from him, finally exhaling, as if she was giving a warning, for now her blood is just medicine for him. And Hannah continued choosing her words carefully. She paused as if hesitating whether to speak or not, but she added that one day her blood would become poison for him. And when that happens, Hannah looked Isabella directly in the eyes. "You will feel the consequences in full," saying that with her voice. There was no threat but a bitter truth. Suffered from her own experience one day, they will become poison for each other, so they must keep their distance. She thought her blood was a tonic or medicine for him, but not a poison. Because of her blood, Christopher would have problems, but I just want to understand how big the problems are. Hannah warned her with so much worry on her face. Could he really die? She thought if so, they will have to stay away. Christopher must break the curse and become the perfect emperor, and Isabella, in turn, must continue to live safely in this world. Christopher entered the room afraid. Apparently the girl said something bad, but still she didn't want to be separated from him anyway. She would have to return to Shido, and they were destined to be apart. It was all too heartbreaking. He doesn't know what she heard, but it was probably nonsense. He asked her not to pay it any mind. But she can't ignore the main character's experience with superpowers. Isabella approached him and said, "Your Highness, let's talk." He was even a little scared then. Isabella thought her face was too ugly. She got angry and gripped the sheet tightly. Christopher understood everything instantly and asked her to stop. He should have told her no. Then the pillow flew right at him with so much force that he even fell onto the bed. Isabella was scared. She felt she had hit him too hard. Christopher was in pain. It looked like he had dislocated his shoulder. Isabella started to apologize to him. He smiled and said he was in terrible pain, and then added that if someone blows on it, it will go away very quickly. She put her hand on his shoulder and thought it was her fault, so she had to take responsibility. Christopher asked her what she was doing, but she was just trying to set the bone at that moment. Christopher grabbed her and turned her. He pushed her onto the bed and hovered over her, leaving Isabella speechless. All Christopher said was, "It's okay now." In the end, it turned out the pain was gone for him. Apparently, it was a groan of relief. Now he was going to have a serious conversation with her. Christopher asked her what happened. Then Isabella began to tell him Hannah said her blood could become poison, and that he could suffer because of her. She asked what it meant, but Hannah said nothing more. Christopher didn't like Hannah from the start, and she didn't even give a reason. There's a possibility she's wrong. He could understand the meaning if he were a wolf. Now Isabella's blood definitely invigorates him. He is a man now, and not a cannibal. He can't hunt. But still, they'd better be careful. She just called her blood poison. But this is what they will do. If that turns out to be true, Christopher doesn't care if her blood becomes poisonous. They will neutralize it. Just like when he gets out of control, she scolds him. He reminded her of how angry he was. Every day when he was Chris, she took care of him many more times. He grabbed her face with his hands and asked her to look at him. Isabella pulled away and asked him to let her go. He could only say that while holding her cheeks. He thought if he makes mistakes again, he'll just ask her to scold him with that beautiful hand. She asked if she could really treat the prince that way. Anyway, she was the only one who could stop him. Isabella clearly remembers how she tried to calm the enraged Christopher, but it would be a shame if he got into trouble because of her. In fact, Isabella was also worried about it. He stroked her head, telling her how honest she was, and that he clearly doesn't want to distance himself from her because of a woman's words, just as she doesn't. But it would be the right thing to do, for each other's sake. But then Christopher asked what would happen if he could guarantee her safety. He also asked her if he could find the right way to protect her. Then would she be okay with it? She replied, "If you can guarantee my life will be preserved." He said okay, he's not going to break up with her. Get those thoughts out of your head. She hadn't forgotten he was choosing a very difficult path. They could solve everything much more simply, just by staying away from each other. That's what she wants. Well, it's not that difficult for them. If it becomes dangerous because of her blood, then they will just avoid bleeding. Isabella scratched her head and said, "Is it really that simple then?" Christopher clasped his hands in front of him and said, "It's decided. This conversation is over." He held out his hand and told her they hadn't gone for a walk in a long time, and offered to fix that. Isabella just said one phrase, "I hate you." However, she got up and accepted his invitation. Isabella was delighted with the conservatory, especially with the variety of flowers growing there. Christopher gently called Rosetta, while taking a linen handkerchief from his pocket. Carefully folded before she could utter a word, she had already sat down on the wet ground, completely oblivious to the possible stains on her dress. A faint smile appeared on her lips as he held out the handkerchief to her. He wanted to spread it out for her. There was a slight annoyance in his voice mixed with concern. Isabella raised her eyebrows slightly, studying his face in surprise. When did he manage to become so gallant? It crossed her mind, but still she accepted the handkerchief from his hands with unexpected tenderness. She spread the cloth on the grass, deliberately making space next to her so that he could sit. Isabella smiled and pointed to the handkerchief. Then she asked him to sit beside her. Christopher sat next to her and covered his face with his hands. Apparently he was very embarrassed by the situation. Isabella started weaving plants together, but since she hadn't done it in a long time, she forgot how to do it properly. He looked at her in surprise, and then asked what she was doing, to which she replied, "You'll see, you'll find out." With skillful movements, she wove a crown, and without giving him time to come to his senses, she placed the creation on his head. "The crown is finished," Isabella announced. Leaning back to admire her work, her eyes shone with the genuine joy of the simple moment. Christopher said he already had a crown, but it couldn't compare to a real one. Then he got up and walked in the other direction. Isabella started on a new project. His voice made her look up. He was holding something in his hands, carefully hidden in his fist. He doesn't know how to weave crowns, so he asks her to accept this. In exchange, she really liked the ring he made with his own hands. She didn't even know he could do that. She liked the gift very much. She thanked him, and he asked her to make him more. But Isabella liked this one too. She didn't understand why it needed to be replaced, to which Christopher said it had already fallen apart. Isabella was tormented by a question: could he smell her? But there was a catch to that question. He looked at her inquisitively. He used to smell something delicious when he was Chris, but she smelled normal, and now she smelled a flower. She doesn't know what she smells like, but it must be nice. Isabella doesn't want to worry about being eaten. Isabella asked what Hannah smelled like. He opened his mouth and asked in complete shock why she needed to know her smell. He felt she was a pervert. Isabella knew that Hannah was the main character. There had to be something memorable about her. She decided to let it go since everyone would find out at the birthday banquet. Of the prince, Christopher asked for her hand and told her there was nothing to sigh about. Isabella had a question she really wanted to ask him. The question was how many girls he'd had. From his expression, it was clear the question was very confusing for him. She noticed he got close to her too easily. Christopher decided to ask her the same question, but Isabella had very high standards. No one had ever liked her. He decided to get a little closer and asked what about him. She laughed and said that he was perfect, and that thanks to him her standards were raised because he was the most handsome man in the world. With a smile on his face, he said that in that case, she probably wouldn't have anyone in the future. Isabella is in trouble. She can't get married or fall in love. It turned out she could live alone, which surprised Christopher a lot. She doesn't want to marry a man with relationship experience, so she'll get a puppy and live alone. Then Christopher indignantly shouted, "Well, I'm right here." What kind of relationship can there be if they are just friends, with the words "not friends"? Christopher moved away from her. She did not expect such a response. He continued to sit there offended. Now the question was in his head. If they are not friends, then who are they? Maybe they were colleagues who had overcome adversity together, she suggested. So he expressed his opinion, to which she replied that it was not necessary to decide for him. They have a deeper relationship than she says. And it seemed she was talking about the relationship between a dog and its owner to Christopher. It seemed to him that she still saw him only as a pet. Then she stood up and said that she recognized him as a real person. Christopher. He stood up and said he would go find another owner. Isabella asked him not to do this because they had not prepared yet. Before she could finish speaking, Christopher pressed his lips against hers, making it very difficult to say anything else. Apparently he was very angry with her. He even told her directly not to talk to him anymore. Isabella was alone again today. She feels like being alone, judging by her mood. She was rejected again by Christopher. He does not even want to see her. She has done nothing, so she does not know why he is so cold to her. But she also understands that they do not have much time left together. Oliver, on the contrary, was happy about this. He said they should stay apart until they left for Yedo. They won't be able to see each other when he returns there, said Isabella, with her eyes full of sadness. Then Oliver said they would go together, but she did not understand why they needed her there. Oliver, with wide eyes, asked her why she was not going, but Isabella simply did not see the point. Specifically to the coming-of-age ceremony. Had she forgotten after the banquet in honor of the prince's birthday? There will be a coming-of-age ceremony. Isabella moved the cup closer and said she would stay home after these words. Oliver shouted very loudly. Isabella even had to cover her ears with her hands. She asked him to speak a little quieter, because her eardrums would burst. Oliver grabbed her by the shoulders and started shaking her. He told her that she absolutely had to go to the ceremony in Yedo, because she herself had said that she would rather die than stay in the north, and that she herself was going to live luxuriously in Yedo. She pulled her hand away, saying that she had already changed her mind. Oliver can't believe what he hears, because she says she has changed, but has she really changed that much? He immediately bombarded her with questions about her health. Maybe she was sick, but she was fine. Isabella asked him if he would be living there until the ceremony. He nodded. She would stay home a while longer. If that were the case, she would not be so sad. Is it really necessary to go to Yedo to get involved in dirty political games? Exactly, besides the Empress will be there. She will not stay on the sidelines, Isabella decided to add, especially. After Isabella took care of His Highness and protected him, the Empress will consider her a henchman, and will start to viciously attack her until she loses heart. The poets reason that she will not go in the original. The Empress was easily killed. Obviously, meeting her now does not promise her a long life. Oliver stood up. He stroked her head and told her that she knew right from wrong well, but that she was no longer a child. Even your eyes are clear and bright, added Oliver with a smile on his face. This infuriated Isabella, and she began to mess up his hair, telling him not to treat her like that again. Then suddenly Simon enters the room. In fact, he was standing behind the door. And watching this image for some time, they hadn't seen each other in a long time, so they greeted each other and began to talk about their business. The situation at the castle is not very good due to uninvited guests. Simon found out about this, as well as the fact that His Highness is staying since he came to receive some treatment. There's no need to tell them he's going somewhere. Simon's heart was moved to hear the young lady make such sensible comments. The Baron finally had good news. They had signed a contract with the clay workshop. Isabella watched with satisfaction the results of their joint work. Finally, everything went well, Isabella thought, feeling pleasantly tired after a busy day. She did nothing, and it's all her fault. Simon handed her a document and added that he didn't know what to do with words. So kind from my lady, she stared at him intently. In that case, Isabella would go with them to Shadow, said Simon. And so she accepted on the condition that she would personally handle the affairs. All of this is because Isabella is the CEO. But she was just an extra, and only put her name on the document here. Her threatening gaze turned to Oliver, so she asked what was going on here, noticing how her brother was trying to hide something. She held the document and saw her signature on it. It was Isabella who mentioned the Asil workshop, so now it's her responsibility. Simon offered to provide his name to ensure the successful closing of the deal, because he doesn't do stupid things. So she decided to change everything immediately, so that Simon would be the director. He doesn't want to take responsibility either. He said, smiling. He thinks that Isabella would definitely do a good job, but this job was simply forced upon her. Then she remembered the conversation they had on the street, where she offered to give him a seal. So they wouldn't bother her unnecessarily. If she had known, she would have never given her seal. She won't let him get away with it just like that. He won't leave just like that. He handed her another document. She looked at him with a face full of distrust, but Simon. To commemorate the Casilla contract, they promised to make earrings and a necklace for her coming-of-age ceremony. She liked the jewelry. She understands that they can't gain fame with them. Simon ran, shouting that he would inform them they would go together. Oliver and Isabella exchanged glances. Apparently she would have to go. She was very upset, then her brother cheered her up a bit. Isabella sighed deeply, her face sad. She began to complain to her maid Grace. She didn't want to go to Yedo. She wanted to stay home. But if she had her way, she would feel sorry for the Baron who had traveled and worked so hard to succeed in this deal. All this money could become her retirement fund. She doesn't want to give up. The earrings and necklace made with mana stones will be well advertised, especially if she wears them at her coming-of-age ceremony. Grace tried to cheer her up, telling her everything would be fine, and that maybe she should really go to Yedo. She understands she needs to pull herself together. Even if she doesn't like it, she's not going to live there. She'll just take a look and come home. Make the most of this ceremony. Grace was surprised by her changing mood. Isabella asked where the prince was now if he was in his room, and she received a positive answer to her question. She thought for a moment, and remembered his words where he told her not to even think about talking to him. It seemed he was really offended, she whispered. But if she had misunderstood, then she didn't have to inform him. She had to sort out her own thoughts. She knocked on the door and asked if he was there. Isabella opened it a crack. The door and realized he was definitely not in the room when she entered. She even held her breath at what she saw. The room was a complete mess. It looked as if a thief had entered the duchy, and most importantly, it was no ordinary thief. Isabella immediately gave Grace the task. They had just left her room. When Martha ran towards them at full speed, Isabella looked at her questioningly. Martha, oblivious to everything, began to rummage feverishly in the drawers, turning everything upside down with trembling fingers and ragged breath. She wanted to ask her something, but she just ran past her. Excuse me, my lady, I have to go, Martha said as she walked away, disappearing down the hall. With a voice full of a strange mixture of fear and determination, she went out, saw Martha, and asked what had happened. It turned out that the barrier was broken. His Highness felt that something was wrong, and in the meantime someone stole a fragment of the chimera. Running to the courtyard, Isabella noticed Martha at the door. What happened? Her voice rang out sharply, forcing the maid to stop. Martha pointed to the side and said that the trail seemed to lead there, but there's nothing there. Except for the waste incinerator. Isabella thought she was planning to burn the evidence she and Grace ran, and Martha yelled at them to wait. They were determined. The maid drew her knives. The boy sat on his knees and watched the burning flames. His clothes were similar to those worn by their family's servants. He had a kind of gold pouch in his hands. Isabella screamed at the top of her lungs for Grace to stop him. Then she threw the first dagger in his direction. It flew right into his hand. Black blood flowed out and the bag fell to the ground. They approached him and asked what he was doing there. The boy stared at Isabella. Of the servants, only Grace the butler and Hannah could look at her directly. Most likely this guy was not one of the castle's servants. He didn't look human at all. There's some kind of loophole in their house for some reason. Someone always shows up. Marta bowed and said she would look for it and close it. But she can't close it because he is a creature, a monster. And this monster was of such a high level that it was able to get through their barrier. Martha divided the space so as not to damage the buildings in any case. Monsters rarely look like people. Martha also suggested capturing him alive and doing some research. But Grace shouted that they just needed to get rid of him. Then the boy looked at all of them. His face was calm and very pale. With a hiss and a splash, 3 snakes came out of his mouth, their scales glistening a poisonous white. And so 3 snakes came out. They began to talk among themselves. They were caught so they could eat. Someone allowed them to eat if they caught them. Isabella smiled and asked who told them. That one of the snakes smiled back at her and replied that woman. Grace and Martha didn't understand what woman they were talking about. Then Isabella thought that maybe they were talking about the Empress. It was almost impossible to talk about it. There are 3 women here. Each one will get one, said one of the snakes. They looked at Isabella and said, this woman looks the most delicious. Grace covered Isabella with her hand and asked her to get back. She has Martha, the elite sorceress, who always controls the battlefield, and Grace, a natural-born elite assassin, so she doesn't need to interfere. The girls stood side by side, and the snakes headed straight for them, and it doesn't hurt at all, said one of the snakes. Martha was in shock, because basically nothing happened to the snake. It seems the Empress prepared the monster, especially for Martha. Grace stood in front of them and said she would try to handle them herself. She seemed to fly at them and cut all 3 necks with her dagger. Black blood gushed from the body and the head flew to the side. They didn't care about such actions at all, so they decided to try and attack again. Grace wiped her face with her hand, and she realized that they wanted to keep doing that kind of thing endlessly. Isabella stayed, watching and wondering where their weak point might be. However, a thought came to her mind. She brandished her dagger and threw it directly at the boy. Then one of the snakes tried to cover him with its own body. Martha found it interesting. It's funny she didn't realize it right away. Now she understands what needs to be done. She raised her scepter, and a huge stream of energy was released from it. Martha directed all her power at them. Suddenly a snake appeared on Isabella's hand. It writhed and tried to bite her. She tried to shake it off, but to no avail at one point. She shook her hand so hard that it came loose. The snake fell to the ground and didn't move. The remaining 2 looked at them with furious eyes. These were high-ranking monsters, and she could deal with them by herself. They were in pain, dizzy, and seemed exhausted. Isabella had told Martha before that these were advanced monsters, and that she was a bit strange, and that they were quite intelligent. Exhausted. They just sat in a pile and talked to each other. Isabella clenched her fist, laughed out loud, and asked who wanted to bite her next. Then they looked at each other and said they wouldn't do it anymore. Sin importar el olor que saliera de ella, Isabella se concentró en lo que dijeron que era un olor delicioso. Ella miró su mano, la cual una de las serpientes había logrado morder. La sangre goteaba sobre el suelo y las serpientes simplemente observaban. Isabella preguntó qué hacer con ellos porque eran repugnantes, tan estúpidos que quería matarlos. Pero aún así tienen un alto nivel y piensan se comunican. Es necesario desenterrar cierta información a través de la tortura. Respondió Isabella. Ya estaba a punto de irse, entonces sintió la mirada de alguien sobre ella y siguió bruscamente. Era Christopher. Luego corriendo al oír el sonido de la batalla, pero ya había terminado. Isabella le preguntó de dónde venía. Le pareció que algo andaba mal con la barrera. Fue a revisarla y allí estaba el dueño de esa cabeza. Tenía que deshacerse de él, pero él asumió que el verdadero monstruo era el chico que él capturó. No está segura, pero tal vez ese chico robó el fragmento de quimera. Cristóbal le apuntó con su espada y le preguntó por qué seguía con vida. El niño corrió hacia él, cayó de rodillas y abrazó sus piernas. A Christopher le pareció que no estaba satisfecho solo con él y comenzó a domesticar a todos los monstruos. El niño continuó la mandola, pero Isabella solo le pidió que se calara. Christopher notó que ella estaba herida y tomó su mano con una expresión muy preocupada en su rostro. Él la miró con calidez y también había alegría en su mirada cuando él intentó beber su sangre. Ella retiró la mano y le cubrió la boca con la suya. En ese momento se sintió muy incómodo. También le pidió a Martha que se encargara de todo. Era peligroso para él cuidarse. Y cuando ella le preguntó si estaba seguro, él guardó silencio por un segundo. En ese momento solo pensaba en Isabella y su bienestar. Él esperaba esto, pero realmente sufre incluso en forma humana. Primero necesitan determinar si es venenoso. El niño dijo que no había veneno en él, pero si eso era mentira. Grace inmediatamente le cortaría la cabeza, así que cambió su respuesta y dijo que sí. Entonces ella se acercó a él y comenzó a acariciarlo. Era doloroso para él porque tenía fiebre y las heridas le ardían mucho. El niño le pidió a la dama que lo salvara, pero él lo mordió con sus colmillos venenosos. Entonces prometió que a partir de ese momento solo la obedecería a ella. Marta pidió minimizar sus movimientos y descansar. Analizara rápidamente su veneno y preparara un antídoto. Luego lo agarró por la nuca y lo arrastró consigo. Isabella esperaba que todo estuviera bien, pero los pensamientos de matarlo nunca la abandonaron. Isabella yacía en la cama, completamente sin fuerzas para nada. Oliver y Grace gritaron que simplemente se desharían de ese bastardo. Pero no pueden simplemente deshacerse de él. Déjenlo enviarlo al infierno de la manera más dolorosa. También les pidió que estuvieran un poco más tranquilos. Estaban preocupados por su bienestar. Grace corrió a buscar un médico, pero Isabella simplemente los ahuyentó. Ahora solo quiere relajarse. Al oír un clic abrió los ojos. Era Christopher, pero ¿cómo podía decirle que sentía un dolor mortal? Cuando él tenía esa cara, ella se vuelve opaca como si hubiera cogido un resfriado. Se pregunta si él está vivo o no. Porque Oliver no se anda con rodeos con él por ahora. Marta está practicando con él, pero todos saben que lo practicará hasta que muera. A Christopher le preocupaba si a ella le gustaba, pero ella ni siquiera dijo eso, así que él dijo que estaba mintiendo. Porque ella lo protegió cuando él intentó matarla. Necesitan sacar la información porque todo esto es para él. Christopher estaba muy preocupado de ponerla en peligro, pero ella se rió y dijo que si algo pasaba podría escapar. Él preguntó qué debía hacer entonces. Atraparla o dejarla ir. La hechicera tenía razón. Por su culpa él podía salir lastimado. Si está hablando de ayer, entonces no fue tan peligroso. Empezó a hablar de su sangre, una sed enorme de hacer la suya, no dejando ni un solo cabello para nadie. De la cabeza a los pies, quien quiere comérselo todo. Se disculpó porque empezó a hablar como un verdadero imbécil. Christopher ni siquiera bebió su sangre, pero ahora tiene prisa por comérsela. Quizás se equivoque en algo. ¿De verdad cree que la verdad podrá comérsela si el peligro del que hablaba Khan estaba relacionado con su apetito? No habría necesidad de que ella huyera, por eso sugirió que lo saludaran inmediatamente con el puño hasta que recobrara el sentido. Se rió. Una paliza para hacerle entrar en razón le habría venido muy bien. Ya le dijo que lo regañara si no obedecía. En ese momento ella se sonrojó. Lo que más esperaba Christopher era que todo aquello fuera una tontería. Al final todo él, como dijo la hechicera, él todavía no lo sabe. Después de todo, ¿qué sentido tiene que Isabella se convierta en veneno para él si bebe su sangre, ya sea por apetito o por cualquier otra cosa? Se frotó la cabeza. La hechicera se preocupó por él. Le dijo a Isabella que quería comérsela, pero echó todo en un montón. Porque no se refería solo al apetito literal. Estaba claramente dominado por un doble deseo: masticar a Isabella entera y embriagarse con ella. Él no se sentía así cuando era lobo. Christopher se tensó un poco cuando alguien comenzó a entrar en la habitación. Era Oliver. Quería hablar. Lo que le preocupaba era que esta vez la emperatriz tenía como objetivo a Isabel y no a él. Sus palabras eran ciertas. Christopher las confirmó. También decapitó al monstruo que estaba cazando a Isabel. Ayer siempre están buscando a una mujer y las únicas mujeres que pueden cazar son Marta e Isabella. Oliver creía que todo era por su culpa. Isabella estaba acosada por monstruos desde la infancia y ella sufría. Debido a esto su carácter cambió diabólicamente. Todo lo que ella quería era volver a la vida normal. Intenta transmitirle que destruyó la vida pacífica de Isabella. Christopher entendió esto sin él. Después de conocerlo, ella se mete constantemente en problemas. Pero él no puede dejarla ir. Él simplemente no es capaz de hacerlo. Entonces Oliver dijo que solo necesitaba asumir la responsabilidad. Christopher lo miró sorprendido porque no esperaba tales palabras. Pensó que Oliver le diría que desapareciera. Incluso si le pidiera, todavía no escucharía. Esto no quiere decir que uno deba contactarla más de lo necesario. Que no piense tonterías. Tiene muchos caballeros. Sería demasiado si el príncipe heredero fuera tratado como un simple caballero. Christopher no la protegería si tuvieras que hacerlo. Se puso la mano sobre el corazón y dijo a costa de su vida con la mirada llena de confianza en sus palabras: Isabella ha decidido ir a Shadow. Tiene un trato que no puede perderse. Oliver se rascó la cabeza y dijo que ella iría con él. Originalmente estaba planeado que coincidiera con la ceremonia de mayoría de edad de Isabella, pero en tal situación no se podía hacer nada, aunque la atención de la emperatriz seguirá siendo el foco de su atención. Ya que hemos llegado hasta aquí, ahora es su turno de ponerla de los nervios. Oliver también le recordó el vino que Christopher le prometió. Él se rió y le dijo: cuando quieras puedes beber hasta reventar. El niño corrió a la habitación y gritó: señora. Intercambiaron miradas. El chico estaba un poco asustado. Christopher lo agarró por la nuca y lo arrojó directamente contra la pared. Le preguntó si iba a disculparse por lo que hizo. El niño se sentó de rodillas con la cabeza gacha y solo dijo en voz baja: lo siento, de lastime, así vive Isabella y todos los monstruos le piden disculpas. El único monstruo que conoce babea y se lo arrolla. Dado que es un monstruo de alto nivel, podría ser útil tenerlo cerca. Christopher preguntó si ahora que había hecho su trabajo podía matarlo. El niño corrió y saltó a sus brazos rogándole que lo dejara vivir. Él pidió No llamarle amante porque eran enemigos? Pero él dijo con lágrimas en los ojos que ya no eran enemigos sino del mismo bando. Ella ya lo había pensado antes pero ahora estaba segura de que algo andaba mal con su oído pero eso era normal. Porque todavía era joven dijo Marta. Ella sonrió y añadió que en años humanos tenía unos 10 años. Isabella sintió que se le erizaba el pelo de la nuca. 10 años. Todavía era solo un niño. Pasó por su mente y su corazón se hundió al pensarlo. El muchacho de repente tomó su mano, sus dedos fríos pero fuertes, señora susurró y había una extraña devoción en su voz. Después de todo lo que había hecho, él es lo suficientemente grande y podrá protegerla. Un tiroteo callejero pasó por la mente de Isabella. ¿Cómo podría protegerme incluso si era más débil que yo? Pensó pero no dijo una palabra en voz alta. Isabella puso sus manos en sus caderas y le preguntó su nombre. Pero él no tenía nombre. Le sorprendió que la emperatriz no le diera un nombre. Ahora su nombre será Lumen, dijo Isabella. El niño abrió la boca y 3 pares de brillantes ojos rojos la miraron desde la oscuridad. Las serpientes escondidas en su interior la miraron con curiosidad. Isabella contuvo la respiración. Como si esperara algún tipo de truco, inmediatamente recordó haber disparado a las serpientes arcoíris. Las 3 serpientes comenzaron a discutir furiosamente. Su silbido llenaba la habitación. Si el Lumion, entonces ¿quiénes somos nosotros?, preguntó una. That name should be mine, the other one insisted, and Marta and Christopher turned their heads away to avoid looking her in the eyes. Isabella realized immediately that they weren't even going to help her. Her face darkened as she continued to listen to the argument about who would receive the name. Enough, Isabella shouted forcefully. If you can't agree, each of you will get what you deserve. One snake is now named Lou. The second snake received its due me. The third was content with the last one and, no matter how beautiful they were, Isabella couldn't stand snakes. She turned to Lumion and asked him not to release his snakes anymore. All the snakes agreed and returned to the boy's body. His cuteness is an inconvenience. First, we must clean this up. These creatures were aiming for His Highness. He wasn't well, but she couldn't do anything about it because she cared for him. This is the Empress's assistant. He thinks she will have to let him go back to where he came from. It didn't matter, he was her only cub. She just didn't like that bastard coming in. He smiled and asked her to be nice only to him. Grace smiled because everything turned out well. There was a knock on the door. It was Isabella. The Baron was surprised that she was already well. She explained that she had caught a cold, and that's why she wanted to get some good rest. He invited her in. She would have to go to Yedo with His Highness. But he had already heard the news from her brother. Aside from the novel's plot, she avoided Yedo because she didn't want to get involved with the Empress. As long as the Empress recognizes her as an enemy, nothing else matters. And she doesn't know when another monster will be sent to disturb her sleep. It would be much safer to be inside the fences of her family's estate. Everything became confusing after meeting Christopher, but the ultimate goal didn't change. Her goal was always to lead a quiet and comfortable life. She herself asked what about a preliminary showcase of Asilla's work. At the banquet in honor of His Majesty's birthday, it's better to do this in advance. Besides the nobles from Yedo, noble people from every province will come. If they display the decorations at the right time, the result will surely be excellent. She clasped her hands and asked that since he was going, should she go too? Simon even jumped up because she was the one who had to do it. She had the necessary influence in Yedo for them to get the needed PR effect. Nobody likes it when a boring old man does it. It's rumored that the influence the Baron talks about actually comes from a bad crowd. She will do what she has to do. It's all for money. She will have to put up with it even if it's annoying, Isabella thought. She also understands there's little time, but it would be nice to ask Asilla to make other accessories. Isabella thought it would be best to have them made for her parents. And for her older brothers, too, since they were going to promote the jewelry. The Baron was surprised, and then asked if she already had an idea. She thought she needed to prepare brooches for her father and brothers, and for her mother a necklace, a ring, and earrings. Isabella knows there are only 10 days left, but it would be great if they could manage it. But she hopes Asilla won't give up. Simon told her not to worry. The accessories to be presented at this banquet were already prepared and were now in the final stages, so her request was quite feasible. The Baron didn't disappoint even in the final stage. She plans to make a contract with a mage so that magic can be placed in a processed mana stone. Simon reminded her about the boy who came because she had really praised his skills. If everything suits her, then she's not against signing a contract now. There's only one person left. She handed him a piece of paper and said, "If possible, have them make this first." Simon looked at the sketch carefully and asked what it was. She smiled and said this was a piece for the prince since they were at it. And there was no one better than Christopher to be the best model for the Carcel jewels. Simon immediately realized this would mean a huge sales boost, so he would do everything in the best possible way. Lumion cried out, begging not to be left with this witch. Oliver asked if it was necessary to keep him near. The prince agreed. It was necessary to bring something beautiful, but you never know what might happen if you leave him alone. But if they provoke him, then they might be the ones in danger. She agreed. That if he started to misbehave, they would kill him. Isabella was outraged that Oliver and Christopher had become so close and were getting along. The prince jumped toward Isabella, noticing something was wrong with her. She covered her mouth with her hand. For some reason, the carriage ride was making her feel sick. Christopher will ask Marta to examine her first. It's best to stop, otherwise she'll just faint. Isabella turned to His Highness and he looked at her questioningly. Then she asked him to be quiet. He felt somewhat awkward after being overly concerned. Christopher then looked offended. Oliver said that his Isabella still bites when she's in a bad mood. He suggested they change places so she could lie down. Isabella thanked him and realized she really should lie down. Isabella moved away from them and fell asleep. Christopher approached and touched her forehead to see how she was feeling. Then he wished her sweet dreams. At that moment, she found herself defenseless. They finally arrived in Yedo. Isabella sat on the floor yawning, trying to wake up from a long sleep. She was brought a glass of cold water. Isabella accepted it with great gratitude. After a couple of sips, she seemed to come alive. Oliver noted that her voice was hoarse, even though she was only drinking water, not alcohol. Isabella told him to shut up, as she was not in the mood to argue. But as far as he remembered, she only got carsick when she was a child. She thought that after entering Isabella's body, everything would change, but for some reason it had gotten even worse. Oliver asked where the damn wolf was. She tried to signal to him that he needed to speak more quietly so no one would hear. How much would she have to hear if Christopher had stayed with her? Although if you think about it, they were together the whole time. He was around more than Oliver. Maybe it's separation anxiety. Her brother asked if she had feelings for the prince, if she liked him. After she replied that she did, Oliver immediately jumped up, with anger on his face. Isabella didn't understand why he was yelling at her. She doesn't like him as a friend, she likes him as a colleague. It would be nice if they stayed friends. Oliver asked again, a colleague. But first of all, they are colleagues. She wanted to stay friends, but the prince didn't like that. He didn't want to be a colleague either. But otherwise nothing would have happened. She is his sister, but if he were a prince, he would throw her over his shoulder and leave. But if it doesn't make him angry, he might just eat alone and stay in his room, Oliver suggested. Although it's disgusting, it's very sad to hear this. Christopher looked away with a questioning expression, holding his right shoulder. He covered his face with his hand. For some reason, he suddenly felt sad. "Welcome, Your Highness," said Isabella's brother. Yes, it had been a long time since they'd seen Leonard. Then a man with dark hair appeared, and said his face was glowing. It was Gale. His face always looked like he was dying, he asked excitedly, if he even knew who was causing this. Isabella narrowed her eyes, wondering who that young man was. Her eyes widened as she remembered the crystal ball. This is the man they were talking about. He was shouting that if the prince didn't come, he would resign. Leonardo greeted Isabella and asked how her trip was. Oliver answered for her. He told them how she got sick and then came back to life. Now she was thinking about the fact they still had to return home and go through this a second time. But it's fine, Isabella added. Christopher started to examine her. She didn't look very well. Her face was a bit pale, Isabella said. She took the stone in her hands and asked to test it. Squeezing it in her hand, the stone shattered into several tiny pieces. Isabella smiled, looked at Christopher and asked if he was sure. He replied that he was. He reached out and put the bracelet on her. While my lady was resting, the prince had asked Marta to make it. Thanks to her, it's great. The bracelet had healing magic, so if she wore it, she would feel better. She was very happy with this gift. If she's happy, then Christopher is happy too. Oliver patted her on the head. She told him to get his hands off her before she made him bald. He was offended that she tolerated it from the prince, but he took his hands away. While they were settling things, her father approached them. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. In all this time, she had become a real lady. He had heard from the Baron that Isabella was doing well, managing business. He placed his hand on her shoulder, his palm warm and heavy as always, he said admiringly. And there was a rare note of approval in his voice. But when he added, "Well done, Isabella," she felt the heat spread across her cheeks. She looked at him tenderly and held his gaze. He was happy to see his daughter and how she had blossomed. The father called Oliver for a hug, but he was no longer small enough to be hugged. And where did he get such offspring with his wife's looks? From the arms of the mother he loved so much, said Oliver. Isabella smiled. What a warm family relationship. The father was a little surprised and paused briefly, after which he said how long it had been since he'd seen her smile. With a smile, she looked exactly like his daughter. And her mother, already approaching from behind, said Isabella looks more like her. I was a little worried because she wasn't feeling well. She shouldn't have come out, but she couldn't do anything else. Because her favorite troublemakers had arrived. She opened her arms and said, "My children, come to me." Oliver approached immediately, and Isabella stood to the side for a moment. A second later, she ran to her mother and hugged her with all her love. Thinking about how much she'd grown, Isabella simply gave a genuine smile. You're really smiling now. Yes, it's so amazing. The father came up from behind and hugged them all. They stayed like that for a while, enjoying the moment. Isabella collapsed on the bed. She had eaten too much. It was even hard for her to breathe. Her parents passed her one dish after another to try, but she couldn't even appreciate them all. But with this bracelet, she felt a little better. Isabella lay on her side and began to examine it, and then she realized she was envious of the real Isabella. The Duke's family were good people, past, future, and present. Even when Isabella was taken by the Empress, the Duke tried to save his daughter's life. He didn't cover for Isabella, who had committed an unforgivable sin, much less give up. The Duchess gave her such unchanging love that she doesn't understand why Isabella has changed. Even though she grew up spoiled, it wasn't an environment that would make her dishonest. When they called her name, she would scream and swear. When they touched her body, Isabella demanded many bad things. She was hopeless. She clearly remembers how she insulted everyone, but for some reason, she doesn't remember her childhood. She only has memories from the age of 10. Isabella had to manage somehow. She lay on the floor and tried to find something under the bed. She clearly remembers the bracelet rolling under the bed when it fell from her hand. Isabella reached out to grab it. There she found something that looked like a bracelet, but it was tied with some kind of thread. Suddenly, a storage compartment opened in the floor containing children's things. This wasn't Isabella's taste, although maybe she liked them as a child. Besides the toys, she found a diary. Opening it, she began to laugh out loud. It was written there, "Oliver is an idiot. He tortures me with push-ups. She will definitely get revenge. The art is bad. By the way, today her older brother Leonardo took her. She was supposed to grow just as big and ride him on his back." Her parents asked who she resembled more, and she answered that she looked like her brother Leonardo. She lied because her parents expected too much from her. Dad would cry if he found out, so she had to keep it a secret. Isabella seemed like such a sweet girl in her diary. Maybe Isabella just hit her head one day. But one page confused her a lot. It said that if she went to the palace, she would meet the Empress. She didn't want to go there. Grace looked at my lady and asked what was wrong with her beautiful face. Her skin is radiant, but her eyes have dark circles, and she seems to have huge bags under them. She hadn't been able to sleep for a long time, thinking about the Empress from the diary. The maid approached and asked her to come with her. They had prepared a bath for her. They told her not to be afraid, because they would be gentle, but she was still confused by their strange looks. They grabbed her and dragged her. She could only scream, "Grace, help!" But she just waved her hand and said everything would be fine. Looking at her face in the mirror's reflection, she had no idea what had happened. Her face seemed to glow and looked brand new. She thanked the maids. Suddenly, she realized something was wrong. Everything had changed drastically. She isn't afraid. In the duchy, everyone trembled before her. But here she feels uncomfortable because everything is different. One of the maids asked if she was all right. There was a slight concern on her face. Isabella said she was just remembering her former self, wondering how she appeared in their eyes. The maid said she was the perfect mistress, sweet, beautiful, and even affectionate. She was the most sincere girl, whether to an animal or a person. When she saw someone was sick, she would gather everyone to help. Over time, Isabella changed a lot. Now all of that is over. The gift from the clay workshop suited her perfectly. It's a perfect match. Now they can begin their journey. Oliver asked how the bracelet was, to which Isabella replied that it was simply great. Now she has experienced her brother's power for herself. Her older brother. But she knows it was Eugene who made it. It was he who ordered Eugene to make it. It was all clear to her. Isabella simply thanked him. At that, Oliver even blushed and shook his head a little. He took his sister's arm and they headed to the castle. Music was playing and everyone slowly began to gather in the center. Two girls started whispering. They weren't very happy about Isabella's arrival because of the rumors circulating about her. Oliver noticed she had a bad reputation, but she wasn't the only one. He looked at her and asked her not to do anything that would benefit the Empress, but she already knew that. Then they were introduced His Majesty the Emperor, the Empress Dowager the Second Prince, her acquaintances from the past. They weren't exactly strangers, but it was awkward. She had avoided the Empress as a child, though she wondered what could have changed in 6 years. Suddenly her gaze fell directly on Isabella. She was extremely annoyed to see her there. Well, as for Isabella, she wasn't thrilled either. She couldn't tell if it was hostility or doubt, but Isabella knew one thing for sure: the Empress did not like her. Absolutely everyone in the room was paying attention to Isabella. She was confused and didn't understand why everyone was looking at her. She leaned on her brother's arm and took a fan to cover her face. She doesn't remember what happened between her and the Empress when she was a child. Honestly, she remembers nothing. But it seems something happened. Would Oliver have brought me here if something had happened? Isabella started to ask him directly. What he was hiding from her and why he was muttering. He waved his hand and replied that there was no point in bothering the Empress. That it wasn't necessary to meet her, that she had to be realistic. But she understood perfectly that Oliver was hiding something. Now that she has pushed aside all bad thoughts, she must look in that direction. As expected, she began to smile sincerely. Christopher shines even brighter, especially his eyes, which are like the moon. Isabella realized something was wrong. Oliver immediately looked at her with confusion. She noticed His Highness's eyes had grown darker. But how could Oliver know that if he didn't even look carefully? Someone called her from behind, apologizing. Isabella turned her head cautiously. It was a girl with pink hair. She asked, "You are Lady Carcel, aren't you?" She curtsied and said, "Let me introduce myself. Anisha Durkin, second daughter of Marcus Dukin." She was very kind and invited Isabella and Oliver to join them. She replied with a smile, "Yes, of course." She couldn't have imagined that the time for her debut had arrived. Anisha clasped her hands in front of her and said, "Oh my God, is she wearing that necklace from the clay workshop?" Isabella carefully tucked her hair behind her ear and replied that it was a coming-of-age gift. Everyone started to admire her earrings. They were even more beautiful than the ones Countess Jarell wore. They wondered if they were also magical, and she answered that they were. That in this dangerous world you need tools for protection. It's scary to walk alone because of the monsters. Therefore, these trinkets can only be obtained from the Carceli. They will definitely buy them when they get the chance. Isabella's gaze shifted to the side. She was curious why Christopher was there. Then she realized he was looking in her direction. His gaze was different, as if it wasn't him at all. Isabella's face darkened. She knew there would be some kind of trap. She didn't understand what was wrong with his eyes. The best solution was to keep an eye on him, because she hadn't done anything to make him act that way. Anisha placed her hand. Sobre su hombro y dijo que Isabella no se veía bien y estaba preocupada por su bienestar, le pidió que se cambiara. Parece que aún no se ha recuperado del camino, irá a tomar un poco de aire fresco. Anisha dijo que tan pronto como descanse la deje regresar. Podría haber pensado que lo dejarían solo. Me olvidé de preguntarle si podía unirse, como era de esperar. No puede mirarla. Cuando ella le preguntó por qué estaba enojado ya que estaba preocupada por la razón de un cambio tan repentino. Él le pidió que se fuera. Christopher dijo una vez que nunca la dejaría ir. Él le preguntó qué estaba haciendo. Pero ella no se iría hasta descubrir la razón de esa actitud. Christopher respondió que no había ninguna razón, por lo que ella le preguntó si creía que tenía sentido. Hasta ayer todo iba bien, de repente se dio cuenta él no es su alteza. Él se sintió indignado por ese tono y entonces Isabella le preguntó si se estaba divirtiendo. Burlándose de ella, haciéndose pasar por su alteza, si planeaba engañar a la gente. Necesitaba estar mucho mejor preparado. Él piensa que deberíamos parar esta conversación a juzgar por su tranquilidad. Claramente se conocen, ya que no puede decir qué hacer. Ella se dio la vuelta y se alejó. Pensando que la mejor solución sería preguntarle a Leonardo. Más tarde de repente vio a su hermano y lo miró con sorpresa. Leonardo le preguntó qué hacía allí. A su alteza le pareció extraño. Resultó que era falso. Al parecer él ya lo sabía. Leonardo y el falso Cristóbal se miraron a los ojos. Hizo todo lo posible para no parecer extraño. Leonardo le preguntó cómo entendía esto. Isabella miró la falsificación de pies a cabeza y comenzó a describirla. El color de los ojos es notablemente diferente. Los de Christopher son de color amarillo brillante. No había manera de que su alteza la pasara por alto, e Isabel continuó explicándoles más. Pero eso no es tan importante. Ahora está más preocupada por dónde está su alteza. Ahora ella no sabe si algo podría pasar si encuentran al culpable. Pero Leonardo no puede revelar este secreto hasta que él responda. Isabella no se moverá y continuará molestándolo. Él le pidió que fuera a descansar y que no hiciera una esquina allí en este punto seguido. Bruscamente, para añadir algo, me acerqué de este tipo y le dije señor falso, y luego añadió: nos veremos la próxima vez. Pero con otra cara. Isabella tocó a la puerta y se dirigió a Marta. Ella abrió la puerta con cuidado y cogió su vestido. Luego, con la velocidad del rayo, la arrastró hacia él. El rostro de Isabella se puso pálido cuando vio el pelaje. Plateado. Su Alteza se alegró de verla. Movió la cola y ladró suavemente. Isabella preguntó qué pasó y si podían explicarlo. Christopher empezó a ladrar, pero ella no lo entendió. Entonces se levantó y le pidió a Marta que se lo explicara. Un tembloroso escalofrío de miedo cruzó su rostro, y sus rasgos se congelaron en una lúgubre severidad. Christopher agarró a Isabella y trató de morderle la cara, pero Marta no lo entendió del todo. Isabella seguía sonriendo dulcemente. Le pidió suavemente que la soltara y él obedeció. Había calidez en las comisuras de sus labios, como si el sol de verano se hubiera disuelto en ellas, y sus ojos, como las tranquilas aguas de un lago, reflejaban serenidad. Lo más probable es que quisiera demostrar su afecto de esta manera. Probablemente significaba que no la lastimaría ni la comería. Pero para él parecía completamente diferente. En cualquier caso, para ellos la paz es solo un sueño. Han pasado 5 años, pero Marta aún no puede acostumbrarse a la apariencia canina de su Alteza. Christopher se enojó y comenzó a gruñirle. Pero ella no entendía por qué estaba enojado. Si era cierto, empezó a ladrar emocionalmente, pero Marta no tenía idea de lo que estaba diciendo. La sangre de Isabella es veneno para él y le parece peligroso beberla. Se preguntaron si la emperatriz se dio cuenta de esto. Pero lo más probable es que así fuera. Ella es la única que podría cometer un acto tan repugnante, aunque si él puede convertirse en un lobo, entonces ¿cuál es la dificultad de envolver a su estado anterior? Marta pensó. Isabella, ¿y por qué entonces no podía convertir a Christopher en un lobo? Ella le preguntó a Marta si creía que era la emperatriz quien lo convirtió en lobo. Ella no estaba segura, pero asumió que así era. Ella piensa que todo es una piedra mágica. A juzgar por la reacción en el palacio, están colocadas por todas partes. Parece que fueron utilizados como base para el veneno que se utilizó contra su Alteza. El mundo, por supuesto, ha conservado sus cimientos. Aunque algo cambia, los cimientos permanecen inalterados. Pero ¿qué pasaría si la emperatriz estaba intentando convertir a Christopher en un lobo? Pensaba, no se menciona esto en el libro, pero es posible que Hannah fuera la que intentaba evitarlo. Entonces fue aún más peligroso. Isabella no pudo resistirse y abrazó a Christopher. Esto sucederá una y otra vez. Marta, por supuesto, no quiere hablar con tanta seguridad, sí, pero no puede compararse con ella. Al parecer Marta está hablando de la emperatriz. Sin embargo, se siente excluida por culpa de Hannah, pero ella entiende que puede defenderse sola y se olvidó de animarla. Porque es una buena hechicera, el espíritu de Marta era fuerte, no se la podía quebrar y nunca dudó de sus habilidades. Ella agarró la manilla de la puerta y dijo que necesitaba investigar un poco. Marta salió furiosa de la habitación. Disculpándose y diciendo que se verían pronto, Christopher la abrazó con sus patas y comenzó a lamerle la cara. Aparentemente estaba tratando de consolarla. Ella lo giró y saltó sobre él diciendo: es tan lindo, luego a nadie no es desagradable recibir un beso así. Su rostro cambió en un instante. Isabella incluso se tensó un poco. Christopher la miró con una especie de mirada enotada. Después de lo cual él se acercó y olfateó. Ella intentó detenerlo, pero él siguió atacando, pero no por la sangre. Parece que tienen un problema. Ella le da sangre por primera vez después de la advertencia de Hannah. Christopher caminó hacia ella con una mirada culpable. Ella le advierte de antemano que si lo vuelve a hacer cree que habrá problemas. Preguntó como si se estuviera burlando, como si no pudiera intentarlo. Ella respondió que era posible. Pero ¿y si pasaba algo malo? Christopher le aseguró que conocía su cuerpo y que podría saber él si ni siquiera podía verla normalmente. Isabella le advirtió una última vez cuando él empezó a acercarse a ella con una sonrisa. Ella le dio un golpe en la cara, se acostó y presionó su pata contra su cabeza como si saltaran chispas. Isabella solo quería que él entrara en razón. Christopher dijo: mujer cruel. Ella simplemente sonrió y dijo: para lobo pervertido. ¿Y cómo se atreve a llamar hacia un hombre joven y decente? Si no fuera porque un hombre joven y decente no acercaría tanto sus labios. Él se indignó porque ella misma lo permitió. Ella puso su mano sobre su pecho y preguntó cuándo era. Pero cuando él la besó, ella le correspondió. Christopher la imitó al preguntarle quién era nuestra belleza y ella se sorprendió de que él escuchara todo. Probablemente pensó que era solo un perro normal, pero ni siquiera sospechaba que estaba consciente. Fue él mismo hasta el final. Marta lo oyó llorar. Por eso estaba tan decidido. Resulta que su mente está en el lugar correcto. Entonces surgió la pregunta de por qué le mordió la cabeza. Y aquí resultó que simplemente quería hacerlo recuperar la mente. Es solo la mitad de la batalla. Ella espera que al menos algo haya cambiado para mejor. Se cubrió la boca con la mano mirando hacia otro lado pensativamente. Sus labios temblaban. Tantos pensamientos conflictivos luchaban en su interior en ese momento. Christopher se disculpó y Isabella incluso se sorprendió un poco. No debí haberlo hecho, dijo sin levantar la vista, con las orejas todavía lobunas pegadas a la cabeza y toda su postura gritando remordimiento. Isabella notó inmediatamente esa expresión lastimera en su rostro, la misma que una vez la hizo derretirse y perdonarlo por todas sus travesuras. Entonces abrió los brazos para abrazarlo y ella dijo: ven aquí. Saludándolo con una sonrisa, corrió hacia ella tan rápido que casi la derribó. Su rostro brillaba de felicidad y su cola se movía locamente golpeando el suelo. Se hundieron en el suelo y Christopher se apretó contra ella e Isabella riendo pasó los dedos por su espeso pelaje y en ese momento nada más importó. Solo ese momento tranquilo y cálido. Hannah se horrorizaría al ver esta escena. Es peligroso, probablemente gritaría. Para ser honesta, mentiría si dijera que no tenía miedo. El miedo se agitaba silenciosamente en algún lugar profundo de su interior. Recordándole las advertencias. Después de las advertencias de Hannah, un gusano de duda se instaló en el alma de Isabella. Ya no podía mirar a Christopher el lobo con la misma confianza despreocupada que antes. Cada uno de sus afilados colmillos le recordaba que realmente era capaz de morderle la garganta con un solo movimiento y todo su cuerpo se tensó al pensarlo, pero aún así no puede evitar creer en esos ojos claros. Christopher sintió que su corazón latía rápido pensando que estaba asustada, pero ella solo está un poco preocupada porque podría morderle la garganta. Luego le preguntó por qué no huía, a lo que él respondió que confiaba en él. Ella realmente confía mucho en él. Después de estas palabras, Christopher grabbed her by the neck. Isabella realized that he liked to torment people, but she didn't understand why he was biting her throat after she trusted him, but she couldn't help it after those words. So she gave him an ultimatum. If he ever did something like that again, she wouldn't let him near her again. Isabella started to examine her neck. She was simply horrified because now she didn't know how she could go out in public looking like that if she ever returned to her human form. She wouldn't wait for him anymore anyway. They are in trouble if Oliver sees this. He will get very angry. She can't walk around like this, so she decides to cover the wound. Someone knocked on the room door. She hoped it was Marta. Another guess was that the Empress had sent someone. She approached the door and put her hand on it. At that moment, someone called out. That voice sounded very familiar. It's me, ma'am, said the girl. She asked her to open the door. She was at the banquet as Christopher's companion, so Hannah's appearance was not surprising. Now that things had gone wrong, she hoped that the master, the Lord of the Mage Tower, was nearby. She continued to knock on the door, asking for it to be opened. Isabella looked at Christopher for advice on what to do, but he just advised her to simply open the door. What worried her most was that he would be caught. But Christopher wanted to ask her something. The main characters really do meet as a rule. She ran to open the door with great enthusiasm. When Hannah entered the room, Isabella asked what happened, as if darkness was enveloping her. She carefully approached Isabella, then moved a lock of hair from her neck to examine it. She screamed and said that was precisely why. That they should stay away from each other. Christopher called out to Isabella. Hannah covered him with her hand, but she didn't understand why she was hiding him. She only added that it was too dangerous, although perhaps the most dangerous person was Hannah. She sees that His Highness is too sure of himself, but the curse has not been lifted yet. He had already asked her to watch her language, but she was still as stupid as ever. Then an image formed in her head. Apparently she knows. Hannah knows that Christopher is the crown prince, and that he is cursed. She asked her when she found out. It seems she knew for a long time, said Christopher. It turns out she knew he was his highness. But actually, she just found out today. Hannah would have never thought that the person who was cursed was the crown prince himself. They stood and seemed to stare at each other. Isabella stood to the side and simply watched. If everyone knew his identity, he would hardly wear that collar. But she would have thought that if he were human. But he would not succumb to any demon. The atmosphere in the room was too tense, so Isabella addressed them both at once. After which she shouted enough she forgot to ask how she knew and how she found them. Christopher immediately expressed his opinion. Maybe she came in a hurry because she was afraid he would eat her, and he hit the nail on the head. She was afraid that the young lady might end up in his highness's stomach because of the magic that had entered the palace. She found out their location using spatial magic. That's why she kept asking for the door to be opened. Now Isabella was interested in how she learned about magic, and if she could tell her more about it, she put her hand in her pocket to take something out. After which she handed her the stone that was hidden in the palace. I don't know how it happened, but there is magic inside it that brings out the prince's monstrous instincts. She's very sensitive to these things, so she can understand them immediately if she had managed to get to it before his highness. She could have stopped it, but it was too late as expected. Hannah is to blame for Christopher turning into a wolf because she was supposed to be there for him. What interested her most was if there was any way to stop this and how she should act in the future. It may be difficult now, but she will definitely try to help after these words. Isabella jumped up and ran to her. She said she could ask for whatever she wanted. Hannah asked her to promise to be careful with blood in the future. Even if he asks you to stay away from him, he won't listen to you, Hannah added. She touched her neck and healed the wound she got from Christopher's fangs. She smiled and said, "Ma'am, take care. I'm sorry, I only spoke of it now, but she really cares about her." Hannah is worried because it's rare to find people with her type of blood, but it's not completely unusual. She had met people like that before they were very good. The husband had rare blood like the lady and the wife was a demon. But they even adopted a child like a normal family. They believed they had true love, but their love, as sad as it sounds, was fruitless. The wife couldn't resist the temptation, and tearing out her husband's heart, she chewed and swallowed it. When she regained consciousness, she was so shocked she couldn't bear it and killed herself. Unfortunately, the child also died. Your relationship is similar to that couple's relationship, so she wants you to distance yourselves. If His Highness tastes the lady's blood, he will crave it more and more. And eventually he will eat her and she will simply die. Hannah's eyes seemed to say, "Run right now." But this was not in Isabella's plans. She forgot about escaping when she started giving her blood to Christopher. Christopher stood up. He approached Isabella and licked her face. Besides, even His Highness wouldn't run away. She asked if there was any way to suppress his thirst. But the answer was no, he had to face it himself. But she's not sure that Christopher can do it. If you want to be together, you need to remove the curse. If you become human again, the bloodlust will naturally disappear. Hannah stood up and wanted to ask a question. She took Isabella by the hand and asked her why she doesn't leave His Highness and go with her. Hannah looked at her sweetly. With a flash of hope in her eyes, I forgot and didn't expect such a turn of events at all. She immediately imagined a picture of Hannah, holding her in her arms and His Highness trying to stop them. It seemed strange to her why she was flirting with her, and not with Christopher. Christopher immediately jumped off the sofa and pushed Hannah, telling her to leave her alone. He even held his breath. What a shame. Isabella had already promised to be by his side for the rest of her life. And then they started their bickering again. Isabella stood up and asked His Highness to stop to think about his condition. He was indignant that she only scolded him. Now he would die from injustice. Hannah pointed her finger at him and told him not to fall into that trap. She asked her to stop too. After all, she was the second son of the Empire. Although you wouldn't know it by looking at him, she is also offended. She's just trying to protect her. She asked them to be friends, judging by their behavior and not simply a perfect couple and very suitable for each other. After these words, they looked in her direction with a furious glare, but there was no need to react so harshly. But they really are perfect for each other. That's why she suggested on this wonderful note that they get closer. Hannah doesn't make friends with monsters, let alone demons. Never. For any amount of money. She doesn't know how Isabella reached that conclusion. But they will never get closer. Christopher doesn't need anyone but her, but fate itself brought them together. And Isabella is just an obstacle between them. Christopher asked her not to bring the subject up again, and told her it would be better if she got out of there. If she was finished, then she defended Hannah because he shouldn't push her away. She took her hand, and asked her to stay until Marta arrived. And to be a good friend to the prince, she thought it would be rude to refuse. So she accepted that. Being the case, they decided to tell each other a little about themselves. Isabella started first. She is 18 years old, and soon there will be her coming-of-age ceremony. And her hobby is playing with her puppy Highness. Her favorite food is always changing. But lately she really likes apple pie. After speaking, she reached her hand out to Christopher and petted him. Isabella said Christopher. Then she asked if she was food, to which he replied yes. But there's a limit to jokes, Hannah. She sat and watched all the cuteness happening between them, after which she also decided to introduce herself. She is 19 years old. Hobbies, magic research, favorite foods. No, Isabella decided to suggest they have lunch together. If His Highness was uncomfortable, they could eat together. If you don't want to be friends, she will become your friend, and then propose to you. Marriage. And Isabella held out her hand and said, "Hello, let's be friends." Hannah happily accepted her offer. Christopher, as expected, snorted in disgust. That's good, added Isabella. Hannah stood up and apologized. She had to leave because the teacher was calling her. She looked from behind the door and said goodbye. Isabella immediately noticed that Christopher was in a bad mood. This girl was stealing his personal time, he muttered discontentedly. It bothered him that he had tried so hard to leave her a hickey, and that she had simply gone and erased it. But she did the right thing because she can't go out in public like that. But Christopher just wanted to show off, but apparently he never came to his senses and found something to brag about. He was a little nervous before asking the question. Gathering his thoughts, he asked if Isabella was bothered by his words. She knew everything, so his words didn't surprise her much. She is afraid to lie. If she says those words didn't impact her at all. The tragic story of two lovers was actually a real shock. However, she knew that Christopher could attack her at any moment. But it was good that no abnormalities were found in His Highness. But either way, she is putting herself in danger, he said. Then she replied that this was said by the one who, with drool in his mouth, asked for a sip of her blood every time he doesn't hate Hannah. But he has no great desire to get close to her, and I'm sure she doesn't either. Christopher was right. Hannah was much friendlier to her than to him. She said they could be friends, but there was no need to force him to do the same. Isabella understands that she shouldn't pressure His Highness first. She must get closer to Hannah. Marta burst into the room, scaring Christopher and Isabella with her sudden appearance. She looked very disheveled, and there was a worried expression on her face. Isabella asked with concern what was wrong with her face, but at that moment it didn't matter. Marta began to ask her if she had seen anything strange at today's reception. She also noticed that His Highness was now speaking now. It was clear. My lady's blood, she answered. But now the conversation was about something else. She handed her a red stone. It was similar to the one Hannah had shown her. The only difference was the color. Christopher noticed it too. If the black stone increases His Highness's bloodlust, this one on the contrary weakens it. If there are two stones, there is obviously something else that must not get out of control. It seemed the Empress had partnered with someone Christopher suggested. Most likely if it's a monster, then everything fits, either a high-ranking monster or even a demon. And what was the Empress thinking letting a monster into the palace? How was she going to destroy the prince this time? Isabella thought Marta asked her to be careful whether she is related to what is happening or not. Her blood might attract the monster, so she must return home as soon as possible, and why should she suffer because of the Empress? Somehow it's all unfair with your earrings and pendant. Of course you won't have to worry about anything. The place in front of her was too dark. She was more afraid of ghosts than people. She squinted to look closer, worried that someone might jump out at her from the darkness. When she stopped, she saw a girl in front of her. She tried to back away so quickly that she tripped and fell. The girl who came out of the darkness recognized her. It was Lady Anisha Duquesne, daughter of Marquis Duquesne, whom they met at the ceremony. Anisha gave her a hand and helped her up. She was looking for her. Her conversation was quite strange. Just like her behavior, Anisha approached her, placed a hand on her cheek, and said she was jealous, because she also wanted to look like that. It was as if she hadn't heard her at all. She was acting too strangely to be drunk. Isabella thought Anisha said she smelled good. Probably perfume. What kind do you use? She asked, with a look that was both playful and crazy. Well, I forgot she didn't know because the maids were spraying her. This body was supposed to be hers. She approached her and said, give it to me. Isabella immediately took a step back. It crossed her mind. The idea of throwing her into the break room. The hooded guy appeared out of nowhere. He asked her to get behind him and that he would handle it. Anisha told him to get out, but he grabbed her mouth with all his strength. She tried to push his hand away, but it was in vain. Then the guy threw her a few meters back. He only added that she shouldn't trust just anyone. Otherwise, it would all be over. Next time she will have to be the one to ask for help instead of playing the hero. Whatever it was, he found it. The girl asked if her name was Isabella Carcel. The youngest daughter of Chase. Isabella nodded, and then asked her not to struggle as she only came to test. Here she stopped the smell of alcohol. Anisha didn't smell like that if she hadn't been drinking. Then why without having time to finish her thought? The girl said it was time for them to go. Then Hannah arrived. They told her to wait, but she was worried they would do something again. The lady of the magic tower, Korea. She wondered why the legendary person needed her, to which she replied that she, an old woman, was just around the corner from retirement. But Isabella didn't understand how she was old. Even now she could knock people down with her left hand. Korea asked if she and Hannah were friends, but today they were just friends. Isabella replied, well, why didn't you tell me immediately that you were hanging out with a friend? Korea handed her the papers. It was money for treats. She looked like a father who throws money in front of his children when he's drunk. It was too big a pile to be pocket money. This was the scroll from that same Korea. It's very likely worth millions. A movement, attack, and defense spell. She can't believe she got all this through connections. Then she called her, and Isabella turned her gaze towards her. Korea suggested they meet once in her tower. After these words, she seemed to evaporate. Hannah offered her hand and offered to walk her home, but she refused. The master told her to keep an eye on her. Then she held out her hand. They linked arms and walked slowly towards the palace. Oliver, Leonardo, and Isabella were returning home. Oliver asked not to be assigned more RP, otherwise he would be fired. Leonardo was of the same opinion. He asked them not to worry, because there wouldn't be a second time. It also would have been better if she had passed the baton around the banquet hall. Isabella looked out the window. While her brothers commented on how some chick hadn't left Leonardo's side at the reception, the beautiful bright moon illuminated her face. She remembered the encounter. On the other hand, she invited Hannah to her coming-of-age ceremony. And with that, she promoted her business, so overall it didn't turn out so bad. She really wanted to sleep. 100% when she met Christopher, she would fall asleep. They have an outing at 10 in the morning, so when they get home, they need to sleep well. Isabella knew that if they told Oliver now, he would throw a whole fit. Besides, tomorrow, she will be at his personal villa. If he comes, she will let him pet her. How will she say that she succumbed to the temptation of the soft belly and tender behind of his canine highness? Leonardo said that Isabella was going to the prince's villa. Then he asked why they needed to hide it. It seemed to him that he would dissuade her from meeting with his highness. But he didn't care because he was the only friend she had. He gave her permission to go, but she had to return before sunset. Then Leonardo said the trip would last 3 days, at which point he even choked on his chocolate bar. That is to say, now she has openly declared that she will spend the night away from home and with another guy, but really not with a man, but with a wolf. The wolf is the prince, and the prince is the wolf, spending 2 nights with a wild animal in an unknown place. Now he's telling her not to go anywhere. That's the same reason she didn't want to say anything. Oliver also started to get outraged. Because Leonardo was letting her go to be torn apart by the wolf, Isabella hopes he calms down before they get home. It bothered her that he lectured her like an old man. But he only did it because he cared. Leonardo asked the butler to bring what his highness had given him, as if he could send him to the next world. But of course he could. It seems she's completely obsessed with that boy. How can she be crazy about that suspicious dog? Asked Oliver indignantly. She doesn't think the person who actually planted that suspicious bug could say that Leonardo was brought a box that His Majesty had given him. After which he asked them to stop arguing pointlessly. Leonardo approached Oliver and handed him the box. His Highness said he would understand when he had it. I wonder what trick he was trying to pull again. Isabella thought. Oliver fell to his knees and couldn't believe his eyes. He was so impressed that he didn't even react. The director also asked not to refuse this gift. Isabella looked at what was in the box and thought it was just wine, though perhaps it was just very expensive. Oliver put his hand on her shoulder and with a confident look, let her go. Cradling the bottle, he headed for the castle. Isabella even wondered if he was really her brother, who had recently tried so hard to persuade her not to go. Isabella asked Leonardo what she should tell her father, but he said with a smile on his face that she needed to talk to him, and that now he needed to rest. The father would surely listen to his eldest son's words. Satisfied, Isabella was about to go to bed, because now she could get a good night's sleep. A boy ran into the room screaming, but suddenly he was pulled back by the nape of his neck. Grace asked him where he was going without her permission. She also ordered him to keep himself clean. Isabella asked not to scare him as he is still just a child. But not a human, but a monster. She knows this very well. But his mental age is 10. She asked him why he was so dirty and started to clean him with a handkerchief. He was making cookies. Then he covered his nose and said that she smelled bad, and that the smell would deter anyone from coming near. Isabella scolded him because it's not polite to openly tell someone they smell bad. She asked Grace if she really smelled like that, but Grace said no. Lumion held out his hand with the cookies. This was his gift for her. He had made them himself. Of course the cooks helped him. He wanted to eat them himself, but he held back for her. Grace and Isabella exchanged glances, and then started to laugh because he's a charming and huge guy. Isabella said she wouldn't be home for 2 days. She is leaving for His Highness's villa. While she's away, he will spend time with Grace. Lumion asked to be taken with her. Although he was afraid of the prince, it was much scarier to be alone with the younger witch. But we must not put my lady in an uncomfortable situation. He ran to Isabella and hid, saying that Grace was a living demon. But that didn't mean he wouldn't have to stay home. He thought it was unfair. It seemed Lumion was seriously offended. She thought that even though he was angry, he would still see her off. Grace asked if she was sure she wanted to go alone, but Isabella told her to rest, as she trusted her more than anyone. She also asked her to make sure Lumion didn't do anything bad again. Isabella noticed that when she arrived at her destination, there was a deathly silence. Marta offered to accompany them to their chambers. She turned her head in different directions and surveyed the area. Marta was very surprised to learn they were coming. It was too quiet. There was absolutely nothing here. It is rumored that they bring ghosts here, but Isabella can't stand it, so she asks her not to say such things anymore. Leonardo got irritated by this, because he was very tired from the trip and wanted to get to his room quickly. Isabella finally arrived at her chambers. She was too exhausted. She took her suitcase to unpack all her things here. Isabella shuddered, because she saw a kind of hand sticking out of the suitcase. Then she immediately threw it a few meters to the side and climbed onto the bed, her face filled with horror. The doll moved, and I immediately remembered all the horror movies with Chucky and Annabelle and about what Marta said. They say that ghosts really live in this house. She took a pillow and covered herself with it, realizing that she could easily kill the doll. Half a body emerged from the suitcase, and it even talks, Isabella noticed. Lumion is in the building, he said. How did he get there? Isabella shouted, wondering. But then her face softened. She smiled and said he was a very smart boy, but she told him that with her that was impossible. But he supposedly didn't understand what she was talking about. Lumion was just playing hide-and-seek and suddenly ended up here. You had to see this miracle. He asked where he was now, what kind of place this was. At that moment, a phrase escaped him. It wouldn't happen to be His Highness, would it, Lumion said Marta. He remembers this terrible witch. She came running in hearing my lady's screams, but she found the boy. Apparently he really wanted to play with her, but her assumption was wrong. So she suggested playing with His Highness. Scared, Lumion ran to Isabella and hid, but there really was a prince standing in front of him. He's going to finish him off if he doesn't get off Isabella right now, and starts pulling him with his teeth, but he doesn't like it. He couldn't change his appearance for some time after the transformation, but Christopher was still able to pull him away and started shaking him in different directions. Isabella was about to buy a new toy for His Highness. They felt they couldn't agree on who their mistress was. Lumion ran out of the castle and started to flee quickly. He realizes that the best solution would be to stay home. The younger witch may be a sweetheart, but at least she combed his hair and dressed him in a cool way. Then Christopher caught up with him and threw him aside. Lumion rolled on the ground. After that, the wolf approached and put its paw on him, pressing him lightly against the ground, but the only thing the boy wanted was to be left alone, trying to understand what Isabella saw in him. Lumion doesn't understand why he's messing with him since they've made a truce. Tall, broad shoulders, attractive appearance, these are all factors that his owner really likes. She found many things in him, and Lumion doesn't reach this level. Christopher added that Isabella would spend time only with him, so he shouldn't interfere. Lumion sniffed the air. The smell was very familiar. The last time his owner smelled exactly like Christopher, and he wondered why the lady gave off such a strange smell. The boy asked what he was going to do with the lady, but he was still thinking. Lumion stood up and shook himself off. He was against Christopher eating her. Either he will do it or she will do it. He looked at him questioningly. But in the boy's opinion, the second option is much more plausible. In that case, Isabella will have to try very hard. Leonardo was walking down the hall and heard some strange sounds. He entered Isabella's room to ask if everything was okay with her. The last thing he expected was to find Christopher in her room. Christopher searched the entire room, and Isabella was gone. Leonardo had a serious conversation with him, but the prince had only one goal: to find his mistress. He always feels Isabella's energy. Christopher sniffed and immediately realized that she was in his room. Isabella sat and read a book in complete silence. With a sudden movement, he burst open the doors to the room. She looked at him gently and asked if they had played enough. Christopher feels so strange that someone is waiting for him. On one hand, he would pounce on her right now and swallow her whole. Since he didn't say a word, she asked what happened. Christopher remained silent. He would like to capture that image. He understands that he must restrain himself. Isabella's soft touches and loving gaze only intensify the thirst. She turned to him and asked if he wanted to taste her blood, but Christopher just shook his head, realizing that he could no longer drink her blood. The more it binds him, the more dangerous their relationship becomes. He could lose his sanity at any moment, due to an incomplete mark. Isabella asked him if he could survive without her blood. He simply nodded. Of course he couldn't speak, but it wouldn't be a big nuisance. Isabella noticed that he had matured during the time they hadn't seen each other. She began to pet him, seeing how much he liked it. He shows his charming backside. Christopher realizes that being a wolf is not so bad. Isabella didn't even realize how she had fallen asleep in his room. The first thing she decided to do was look for Leonardo, because she wanted to eat. She looked at Christopher and said softly, "Sleep well, I'll be back soon." I went out and started to look around. The barrier is fine, but we can't let it break like last time. She suggested we go make a wish, since there was still time. As they say, it doesn't hurt to try. After becoming a magician, he didn't start to believe in any superstitions. But it would be better if he started practicing instead of wasting time, said Leonardo. Isabella crept up behind them and placed her hands on their shoulders, apologizing, and then asked me to tell her more. From that moment on, she simply got up. She woke up with His Highness, but woke up from hunger. Isabella asked Marta to tell her about the superstition. She told her, a legend that has been passed down among the locals from generation to generation. In the heart of the mountain forest, there is a huge stone that has guarded its place for 1000 years. They say that if you stand next to it and make a sincere wish, it will definitely come true. Some even believe that it is not a stone but a person. Hearing this, she could not contain her curiosity, and like a fool, she went into the forest and got lost. She sat on a rock and thought it would probably rain soon. Apparently she's gone crazy, because how can you believe in some kind of legend? I wonder if she will be able to wait for someone here. Isabella. She decided to first find a place to hide from the rain. She understood that she needed to find some kind of cave or a huge tree. Suddenly there was a noise in the bushes, and she turned towards the sound. Then she heard a bark. She immediately realized it was Christopher and called him. She couldn't believe her eyes. It really was him. Christopher emerged from the bushes, wondering what she was doing there. He came closer and she hugged him very tight. And she also apologized. Looking at him with a smile, she suggested they go back down. She even did it a bit hastily. Noticing that Christopher wasn't following her, she asked him why he was standing there. Apparently he himself didn't know the way back home. He just barked. There was a bit of tension and embarrassment on his face. The sky grew dark and lightning flashed. It seemed they were trapped. There was no other choice. They sat under a tree to at least hide a little from the rain. When Christopher arrived, Isabella thought she was saved. But in the end, there was just one more lost person. She didn't tell the others where she was going. She didn't expect another answer. She immediately flew out of bed here. Judging by the fact that he didn't know the way, he was simply nearby. But it's not his fault, Your Highness. She herself came here because of the legend. She asked him if he could find the way back by scent. But he just shook his head from side to side, after which he went to the flower and started sniffing it. Now everything was clear to her. That is why Christopher couldn't smell. The lilies smell very good to humans, but monsters find this scent disgusting. And there are lilies everywhere here. It's most likely some kind of shield that protects the villa from other monsters' attacks. Although it could be the other way around. Perhaps it's some kind of devices that prevent Christopher from leaving, or perhaps both. But their situation is not good. Christopher started barking emotionally, so Isabella asked for a translation. He tried to show her with his paw, so she assumed he was asking why she came here. She was told there was a wish-granting stone there. Isabella realized he had just smiled at her. The next question was what wish she was going to make. She wished for a handsome man to fall from the sky, and before she could finish speaking, Christopher lifted her off her feet. But Isabella saw nothing wrong with this wish. She thought it was no time for fighting, and huge raindrops fell from the sky. Isabella said they urgently needed to find shelter. She passed every tree and looked around to make sure she didn't miss one. Soon I came across a cave, and was very happy with my find. She yelled to His Highness that she had found the cave. Then her foot touched the edge, and Isabella fell off the cliff. She opened her eyes slightly, and her face looked exhausted. Christopher looked at her with a scared expression and barked loudly. But his paw was also on the edge, and he started to fall. The horror Isabella felt couldn't be put into words. She tried to get up carefully, since she didn't know her condition. Looking up, she realized she was definitely alive. But when I came to my senses, I remembered how Christopher fell off the cliff. She started looking around to find him. Her face turned pale, her eyes filled with horror. Christopher's body lay motionless and unresponsive. He had serious bleeding wounds on his side. She begged him to open his eyes as tears streamed down her face. Isabella didn't know what to do. The bleeding wouldn't stop, and what worried her most was that Christopher would die. Main characters don't just die, they will survive. The first thing they need to do is get out of the rain. Isabella considered this incident her fault. If only she had watched her step. If she had turned back immediately, realizing he didn't know the way, everything would have been different. If she hadn't climbed the mountain, none of this would have happened. She begged him to forgive her. Christopher lifted his head a little and looked at her. He tried to get up, but Isabella told him not to. Christopher came closer to her and started licking her tears. She was so worried that she then called him a fool because he should think and worry about himself first. Isabella hates herself for hurting Christopher. Her blood is poison for him. Then she remembered that blood heals. She hurriedly grabbed her bag. It can heal wounds, so she pulled out a dagger with a sharp movement. Isabella cut her hand and remembered the promise she made to Hannah not to use her blood carelessly. But at that moment, she didn't care if Christopher went crazy and attacked her now. It doesn't matter anymore. Every minute counts. She yelled at him to drink her blood, but he turned away. And then she told him in an authoritative tone to do as she said. Well, when he refused again, she yelled that she would stop him no matter what he did. She would also do things her way. Then she opened her mouth a little and said that everything was fine. Then she put her hand in and told him to drink a lot. Christopher started to growl at her, and then picked up speed and ran straight at Isabella. She fell to the ground and covered her face with her hands. Christopher looked at her hand. His fangs bared his eyes full of rage and ferocity. She believed in him more than in herself that he could do it. But Christopher didn't stop. He remained standing in the same position. Isabella placed her hand on his torso to check the wounds literally. In a couple of seconds, the wounds healed. She asked him to wake up because she didn't want someone who was only just back from the other world. But it seems she had no other choice. She had to knock him out, so her fist landed right on his face, and Christopher flew to the side. It seems she overdid it a bit with her power. She put her hand to her face and muttered, "How could she hit a sick person with all her strength?" But there was one silver lining. Christopher calmed down. She looked at him tenderly and decided to let him rest for a bit. "Because when he wakes up, everything will be fine." Isabella tore off her sleeve to bandage the wound. She had absolutely no strength left. But somehow she managed to knock Christopher out. It was unlikely anyone would come to their aid in such weather. So she decided to start a fire to last at least one night. When she looked at the ground, she saw that someone had already made a fire here. Apparently someone like them had been in an accident. Looking deep inside the cave, she thought there might be branches left behind by others, who had been lost before she lit a match to light her way after looking around a bit. Isabella smiled indeed. There were several branches lying on the ground. She needed to start a fire quickly. She picked them up one by one. Looking carefully, she noticed something strange, but it was all too suspicious. But Isabella knew she had no choice. Walking a little further, she saw that exact stone. This was the cause of all her suffering. It was obvious that no smart person would find the stone in such a place, but be that as it may, she clasped her hands in front of her and tried to make a wish. She would be too upset if she ended up not making a wish. The most important one is for Christopher to wake up safe and sound. She also asked for her hand to heal. Another wish was for them to be saved after all. She made a wish to fix the whole mess she had caused. After staying there for a couple more minutes, she decided it was time to go back. When I turned around, I slipped on a rock. It wasn't a day, but a disaster. She looked at the water and for a second was in a stupor. Her sleeve was floating a few feet away from her. The bandage probably came off when she fell. Isabella was worried she might get some kind of infection. But when she looked at her hand, she saw it didn't have a single scratch. She didn't understand how this was possible. She didn't have such abilities. It seems her wish really came true then. With a confident look, she clasped her hands in front of her and said, "Please give me a handsome guy, But it seems the stone didn't grant such wishes. Then out of nowhere, a man appeared holding a glowing sword in one hand. He was an elderly man with long hair and a thick beard, braided into a pigtail.